Hey guys. You are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku discovered the darkest secrets of a parallel universe. Here is short summary. In their second school year, Izuku and his classmates find out about a secret project that opens the doors to other worlds. But when a few of them are sent into one of these worlds, they face their worst nightmares. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. There was once a theory that many worlds existed beside our own. Parallel universes, alternate timelines, other dimensions and similar theories. Both science and fantasy had played often with these ideas. But it never came beyond the stage of wild theories in science fiction. And then with the emerging of the quirks and the resulting worldwide chaos, any serious scientific work in this areas came to an halt. Until today. Midoriya Izuku, the hero in training called Deku, and the rest of Class 1A, now 2A, of the hero course were now in their second year in UA Academy, or short UA. It was now over a year ago since the fall of All for One, and the resulting retirement of All Might. In fact, the first year anniversary of the metaphorically world-shaking battle between the now former number one hero and the former shadow ruler of Japan and founder of the League of Villains was last week. Related to that, there had also an official memorial ceremony for All Might been taken place in front of the Japanese government building. For that, not only All Might himself had been present, but also the new number one hero Endeavor, the rest of the top 10 and several other pros, the Prime Minister and several other representatives of the government and UA's headmaster Nezu. Most of UA's student body, Izuku included, and the remaining teachers had been following the ceremony per live TV. In their first year, they all had gone through many terrible threats and challenges, far more than any students would and should have ever faced. That included villain attacks on them in their school, battles of life and deaths, the League, Stain the Hero Killer, the Yakuza leader overhaul. A few of them were even present at the fight with All for One. In opposite to that, the first half of their second year had actually played out very quiet. The League of Villains was still active and just as dangerous as it had been before, but, with the exception of Kurogiri's mysterious breakout from a prison transport, they had kept a relatively low profile for the last months. That, however, was not necessarily a good thing. Many believed that this only meant that the League's leader Shigaraki Tamura, who seems to become more shrewd and dangerous with every month since his master had been taken into custody, was either using the chance to gather more followers and recourses or was preparing for a big coup. The only time Izuku and his class had actually technically encountered them was that incident 4 weeks ago when he and his friends Iida Tenya, Uraraka Ochako and Asui Suju had been together in a shopping mall. As it turned out, however, Toga Himiko seemed to have been shadowing them, or rather him, for a while and now decided to make a move on him, in every sense of the word. Toga had just taken the shape of some random girl with long brown hair, wearing a red t-shirt and short pants. And as they passed her, she practically jumped at him with open arms. "Izuku-kun," she called out happily as she threw her hands around him, while tackling him to the ground. He was just lying there and his three friends just standing with open mouths, too surprised to activate their quirks or even react to the situation for a moment. What? What are you?" Izuku could only cry out in confusion. Ochako, however, suddenly felt a wave of anger and jealousy rising up in her. "Hey, what do you think you?" she started. It was only as the "unknown" girl sitting on top of their friend, who was just busy embracing and straddling him, suddenly pulled out a knife from her pocket and stabbed him in the shoulder, that they all realized how serious the situation was. It took them only a split second to figure out who they were dealing with, especially when the girl pressed her mouth on the wound and started drinking his blood. Toga, Ochako and Suju called out nearly at the same time. Like to answer them, she started to turn back into her real form in front of them. Much to Izuku's luck, she had obviously taken the clothes of the girl she had copied this time, instead of copying them with her quirk. So this time at least she didn't turn out naked. Still, Izuku could only stare at her silently. Suyu, however, finally reacted and wrapped her long tongue around Toga to pull her off Izuku. This, however, didn't work out, since Toga now pointed the knife she still held in her hand upwards to stab Suyu into the tongue. The frog-quirked girl painfully remembered how the villain had slashed her tongue the last time. So she quickly pulled it back. Not this time, Ribbit, Suyu said. Oh, Ochako, Su-chan. Toga greeted them, and Glasses Guy. She looked at Iida. It's so nice to see you again too. My name is Iida, Tenya responded. Yeah, whatever, Toga commented non-caring. The three young heroes wanted to move again and grab her, but now they saw that she was holding the knife at Izuku's throat. They all froze. Now, we all like Deku-kun, right? So we don't want something to happen to him, so you better stand back. Iida growled slightly. Even with his quirk there was no guarantee that he could disarm her without Midoriya getting hurt in the process. And at this close distance he could not use his full speed anyway. Ochako, Su. Do you want to join in too? I am sure Izuku-kun could have so much fun with us three. Toga turned to them suggestively and gave them a smile, showing her sharp canines. Both girls and Izuku turned instantly deep red in the face, despite him still having a knife at his throat. Toga. What are you doing here? Izuku asked her nervously. What do you think? I just wanted to see you silly, we have not been together for so long my love. Stop this. Uraraka yelled. Get off of Deku right now you lunatic. Why? Can it be that you want him for yourself? She asked. Maybe I should get jealous now. But, since we are such good friends, I might be willing to share. If you ask nicely, she chuckled. What? Ochako called out. Then Toga did something that truly none of them had expected. She pulled Izuku's face forward and pressed a deep key asterisk on his lips. Do you really think I would have killed you, darling? Never. What would I be without you? They realized that she had removed the blade from his throat, but they were still frozen in complete surprise. Then she jumped off him, did a backflip with her typical acrobatics, and run away. Right through the crowd of people that had formed around them. A few of them actually had their handies out to record the entire bizarre event. Hey, Suyu called out. After her, Ribbit. We could have captured her right now, Iida said angrily. But we let her distract us. Damn it. They were now all running after Toga, who was fleeing through the mall. For a few moments they lost sight of her, because of the many bystanders in the way. For the same reason Iida was not able to use his super speed and catch her right away. But then Izuku saw her, running into one of the corridors at the side of the hall. There, he called out. She is running over there. Very good, Iida said. This corridor is going nowhere. She has finally made a mistake. A few moments later they had finally cornered Toga as she had reached the dead end. Surrender, Izuku said to her. You have finally got me, Deku-kun, aren't you happy? She said sweetly. Ochako moved and kicked the knife out of her hand, while Suyu wrapped her tongue around her once again. We have really captured her, Izuku said. Tenya, call the police. Tell them we have captured a member of the League of Villains. But they all were disappointed one moment later. As Toga's body suddenly dissolved into nothing but purple goo before them. No, Tenya shouted. That was one of Twice clones, Izuku said. He must have been somewhere here to help her. They must have switched places at one point, or maybe this Toga had been a clone from the beginning. They have tricked us, Iida said. They made us look like fools. In some distance away, Toga, now in yet another different form, and Twice without his mask were walking together at the sidewalk. Thanks again for helping me with this, Twice, she said. I am always glad to help you since you're a friend, he answered. I am jealous that Deku has a cute girl like you going after him and I have not, he said then. Do you think Shigaraki will be angry at us for doing this? Toga said a moment later. No, I don't think he will care much. We have nothing else to do and we embarrassed the heroes after all, he told her. He will probably be furious. He is talking the entire time about this great plan after all, he said then, contradicting himself. Well, we will see. The key asterisk Toga thought. Of course it was not really her thing. Her main reason for keying him, she admitted, was simply to catch Deku-kun and his friends off guard. She preferred drinking someone's blood. At best after getting close to someone and slashing him. Now that was romantic. She only wished Izuku-kun would see it the same way. But that didn't matter. someday she would convince him. But this simply pressing your mouths together and even drinking each other's saliva, it always seemed strange to her. Not that it had felt bad. It had actually been quite pleasant, she thought back, at least when it had been with Deku-kun. She would not mind doing it again if it was with him. What made it even better, however, were Ochako's and Su-chan's reactions. She had to suppress a giggle. Alone seeing the look on their faces made it worth it. Toga took out her cell phone, and a few seconds later Shikaraki's voice was to hear. "Where the hell have you been? I have not seen you the entire day," he asked them. "I am sorry, Shigaraki-kun, but there was something I really needed to do," Toga said sweetly. "Let me guess, it had something to do with Midoriya," he sighed. "Well, whatever, I have just spoken with our new friend. Our plan will start soon. Come back. I will fill you into the rest of the details. Remember, if this works out, then the League of Villains will soon have the greatest military force in Japan." "Yes. You have said it often enough, Shigaraki-kun. We will come right back." Izuku had really hoped no one would remind him of that incident anymore. Not only had Toga escaped them, Iida had been right. In the moment she had removed the knife from him, they could have easily captured her. But they had all been so shocked from the fact that she had actually keyed him. They had looked like complete beginners. To that came that he actually had his first key asterisk with a villain. At the same time he remembered the feeling of her lips on his, and her body pressed against him, and if he was honest, he just didn't know what to think. Right now he just wanted to forget that the entire thing ever happened. But sadly his wish should not be fulfilled. As it turned out, some of the bystanders had actually made photos and videos of the event. And exactly this videos started to show up on the net the next day. Of course the press had caught up to it very quickly and had a field day with it. Izuku for his part just wanted to dig himself into a hole as he saw the headlines of some of the articles and newscasts. Forbidden love. Is there a hidden romance between young hero Deku and the villain Himiko Toga? That article came with a perfect picture of the key asterisk between him and Toga. Known villain uses appeal to "overpower" group of aspiring heroes. Seduced by the enemy? Young hero falling for charm of villain girl? And that were only a few of them. He explained the situation to Sensei Aizawa and to both All Might and the headmaster as they asked him about it. But he felt even more embarrassed than before, talking with them about this. And finally his mother. They all believed his version of the event, of course, especially with the others confirming everything. But that didn't keep the rumors from going on for an entire while. Nobody in his class said anything, after Iida, Tsuyu and Ochako had explained the situation. Only Bakugo, Kachan, commented sarcastically that he should not "make out with his villain girlfriend in public again." Well, it was Kachan, so what did he expect? But then he too kept quiet about it. After a few weeks and a declaration in an official interview from both All Might and Headmaster Nezu, that there was absolutely no chance that he would turn to villainy, that he was in no relationship with Toga, and that he was one of the most devoted students in UA. The entire ruckus about the event finally ebbed down and the entire thing was nearly forgotten. It was nearly as if the people had just wanted something to talk about. In the end it actually looked as if Deku had become even more famous because of the incident, but certainly not in the way he would have wanted. The quirk, a nearly hilariously simple term for the sudden evolvement of superpowers all over the planet. It all started with the birth of a single, bright glowing, baby. A child that was born with special powers in a town in China. Powers that, as it grew up, would make the child, in a sense, superhuman. Or at least it gave it abilities that the normal population didn't have. As it turned out, it was only the first of many. More and more of these "super babies" were born. And slowly they grew up to be people with superhuman powers, also called quirks or individuality. Nobody actually knew why. The cause of this sudden radical change in humanity had long been looked for by scientists all over the planet, but never truly discovered. Only theories had been made. In the end they agreed that it was probably a spontaneous sudden jump in the evolution. And these new people started to use their powers, each by their own ideas and purposes. The result for society was obvious: chaos, unrest, social uprising. The normal people were afraid with the one with powers and began to single them out and drive them at the edge of society. But very soon the births of these mutated, or evolved, depending on how you saw it, children surpassed the numbers of the normal ones. On the other side, however, some, if not many, of the "powered" people used their gifts to commit crimes, cause random destruction, and even founded criminal organizations based around their quirks. So in some cases maybe the fear of the normal people was justified. Wars, social uprisings, terror. That were the consequences of this sudden change. Gangs and crime syndicates were running entire regions. Police forces were helpless. Laws, social rules, and even governments became meaningless. Quite ironically, it was a figure that so far mostly came out of comics and TV, that finally brought the chaos under control: superheroes. Just like some, who were soon generally known as villains, used their powers to run amok, other quirked individuals got active to stop them. After only a short time, they were officially recognized by the government, and the occupation "hero" became an actual job. But that was already a long time ago. Now, after several generations, over 80% of the worldwide population possessed quirks. Heroes were by now part of the daily life. They were the most prominent and famous profession on the planet. In many ways they were just as much superstars as enforcers of law and order. The entire human race, and even what it even meant to be human in the first place, had been completely turned upside down. Was it simply a sudden jump in evolution? The progress to the next level of the human race? Sometimes, of course, however, some people ask themselves how the history of the world had turned out if the phenomenon of the quirk had not appeared. What would have been? What if? One thing, however, was taken as fact by practically all scientists and historians. Without the quirks and the resulting social and political chaos, humanity would already have reached a much higher technological level. Some believed without the humans would have already reached the stars. So the question could be asked, were the quirks ultimately a blessing or a curse? The present, in the area of Kyoto, Japan right now, Izuku and the rest of his class, including their teacher Aizawa Shota, aka the underground hero Eraserhead, were standing assembled in front of a large building in the outer areas of the town. They were, however, not the only ones. Also present were the second Class A of the hero course, Class B and their teacher Vlad King, the support class with their teacher Powerloader, and also the business and general education classes. So the entire second year of UA, all in all well over 100 students. The third year had actually already made the same visit the week before, and now it was their turn. They were all here as a very special assignment that their school had been invited to a few weeks ago. The building they were standing in front of was the headquarters of the Japanese branch of the multinational supercompany HCP, Hero and Citizen Products. It was internationally one of the greatest producers of computer, transport and hero support technology. The man who had invited them all here was nobody else than the boss and owner of the entire company. They were here for a visit and in tour thought the building a demonstration of the company's entire working processes. But there were not only students present, there was also a group of actual pro heroes standing in close distance to them. That consisted of Endeavor, Gang Orca, Edgeshot, Death Arms, Kamui Woods and Mount Lady, and also the former top 3 students of UA, who had graduated last year and were not pros themselves. They and the Class A students, in first line Izuku, Ochako and Tsuyu, had already exchanged a heartfelt greeting as they saw each other. "It is really nice to see you here, Midoriya," Mirio Tagata, one of the big 3, greeted him. "Thanks, I am glad to see you too, Mirio," Izuku said. Before they could say anything else, however, they were being interrupted by the people who were just coming out of the building. In the center of the group was an about 30-year-old man wearing a suit. Beside him was a woman in a business dress and around them 2 lines of armed guards, a few of them having obvious mutant quirks. "Welcome," the man said to them. "It is a great pleasure for me to greet you all here, both the present and the future of the hero world," he announced. Current hideout of the League of Villains. Most of the current members of the League, under them the recently returned Kurogiri, Dabi, Toga and twice, Mr. Compress, Spinner and several other. Most of the last one's new members are simply hired help. "We are all ready," Kurogiri informed Shigaraki. The leader of the League was standing in front of the crowd. in his typical villain outfit with multiple hands attached to different parts of his body. The most important one covering his face. Good, you all know the plan, Shigaraki Tamura said. Our ally has given us the exact details of the company building and also the entrance codes. Toga, do you have taken the blood? He asked her. Of course, she replied. Good. The plan cannot go wrong, Shigaraki declared. HCP Building. I am Bob Jones, CEO and owner of HCP International, he introduced himself. As some of you might know, our company is not as prominent in Japan as it is, for example, in the USA or Europe. But believe me, we for sure plan to change that in the close future, he said with a winning smile. This comment caused a few chuckles under some of the students. Students of UA, you all have been invited here for a tour through the local part of our company, but that is not everything. As your headmaster and the teaching body have already been informed, there is a special project that we want to demonstrate to you all. A project that will change the course of this world. And what exactly is that? Endeavor asked. I hope I am not wasting my time here and this guy truly has something interesting to show, Bakugo said quietly to Kirishima standing next to him. I guess we will see, bro, he replied. While the majority of our company deals mostly vehicles, machines and parts for hero support items for the daily use. We are also investing heavily in the development of new technologies and resources, and that is exactly what this new project is about. Maybe you should finally tell up what is so great about it. We have waited long enough, Bakugo announced. The company owner's eyes turned to him at the interruption. For a moment he had a stern expression, but then he was smiling again. Bakugo Katsuki, right? I have heard about you. Then he looked to the other Class A students. And Midoriya Izuku, about you too, of course. Well, you see, that is not like you think. Izuku stammered nervously. I mean, I had no idea that she would suddenly me, really. This, Jones just looked at him confused for a moment, before he broke out into a chuckle. That was not what I was talking about, Midoriya, he said, while still holding back his own laughs. Most of the other students and even some of the pro heroes had now joined in on the laughter. I meant the fact that you have defeated that villain Overhaul and all your other heroic acts. Jones said now seriously. And to be honest, I really dislike it how the press had treated you over this incident. Well, thank you, sir, Izuku answered embarrassed. Okay. Your classmate Bakugo had made a suggestion, however, so I guess we should follow his advice and show you our special project first. It is also this project that my company wants you to protect, he turned to the pro heroes. And for that we have offered each of you a gratification of $700,000 in addition to your regular payment from the government. Or in Endeavor's case $2 million, he added. What? Izuku asked in surprise with a look at his teacher. What in the world did they want to protect what they gave pro heroes, who were already paid by the government, millions of extra payment for? What was going on here? Their expectations were not being disappointed. What is that? Ochako asked in awe as she saw the bizarre machinery before them. What you see before you is our secret project, Bob Jones announced. We also call it the Gateway. It will not only allow access to unlimited sources of energy, it will also give the world completely new possibilities regarding transport, travel and trade. What we are doing here is nothing else than opening the gate to another dimension. Even Bakugo was speechless at this announcement. We have been able to access the space between the dimensions. We also call it hyperspace, and after our first experiments we believe we able to use to directly draw energy from other dimensions. An infinite source. And if our other theories will turn out correct, we will be able to move men and objects through space without any loss of time, to other countries, or even other planets, without the need of a teleportation quirk, and with greater range and able to move more people than any quirk user could ever hope. They all had just listened to Mr. Jones' more than a bit fantastic explanation. Well, Bakugo finally said. Excuse me, Aizawa spoke up. I have one question. Of course, Jones replied. I understand that you want to protect this project. But, you are paying millions to pro heroes, who have the duty to protect you anyway. Do you have specific reason to fear a villain attack? Jones sighed barely visibly at the question. Only for a moment, then he seemed to have caught himself again. Very well, I wanted to show you anyway. You are right. I will show you now the reason I have hired you. He was looking around. Maybe your 2 hero classes should watch it as well, since they are already here. There is always a chance that something could happen while they are still here after all. Aizawa sighed. I guess it is not a bad idea. A hero must be aware of the situation he is in after all, he said. A few minutes later they all were sitting together inside a large conference room. There was a large TV set standing in the center of the room, with 2 lines of table positioned around it. The actual pro heroes with Endeavor in the center were sitting in the first line, closest to the screen. Izuku and the other students were in the second, with Ochako, Bakugo and Kirishima were sitting to his right, and Tsuyu, Iida, who was also president of Class A, and Endeavor's son Shoto left from him. With Kendo Itsuka, the president of Class B, close by. Sitting beside her was her classmate Monoma, a boy Class A knew mostly through his constant taunts and provocations and doing everything to heat up the rivalry between their classes. Today, however, he had said nothing so far. Possibly mostly because Itsuka and the rest of his class threatened him with what would happen if he caused a scene while they were guests here. What you all should know is that I and my colleagues here are not the original inventors of the portal. It was my father, the founder of this company. He had invented the original prototype over 6 years ago, but then. The man looked visibly distraught for a moment. This is what happened. What you see now was recorded at the first attempted test run of the original portal at our headquarters in San Francisco 6 years ago. I hate showing this recordings, but you need to know. He nodded and his assistant activated the TV. It showed a room and inside a portal device nearly identical to the one they had just seen. Standing before it, they saw a man around his 40s, and in front of him a group of 4 beings who clearly didn't belong here, intruders. They all were wearing strange-looking outfits and body armor, nearly like heroes or villains. Around them on the ground were lying of a half-dozen unmoving guards. They are all still alive, Darien, one of the strangers called out. Good, the obvious leader of the group said. He was a young man, looking in his 20s, with shoulder-long brown hair and wearing a futuristic-looking kind of armor. Destroy everything here. Our agents are already wiping out all other traces of this project. You think this will stop me? The man who was obviously Joan's father called out. I will start all over again if I have to. My project will change this world, no matter what I have to do. Richard Jones, your project, is a threat to this world and its people, the leader of the intruders replied. No, it will make it better. I already evolved and I will share this gift with the world. You are insane, the stranger said, and I see you leave us no choice. He materialized a sword in his hand, seemingly out of nowhere. What kind of quirk was this? Izuku asked himself as he saw this. Then the man took one step forward and drove the sword right through Richard Jones' chest. In the present, both the pro heroes and the students were looking at the screen, where they had just seen a cold-blooded murder. They all could understand perfectly well that Jones hated showing them this video. This is what happened to my father. He tried to make this world a better place and was killed for it, by people who just fear any sort of change. So this is what happened to the founder of HCP. Kamui Woods stated. He had known that he had been murdered. News like this were hardly to miss, but not the circumstances. Have this villains ever been found or at least identified? Mount Lady questioned. No, Endeavor declared with a frown, his face still scarred from the injury against the Numu several months ago. I had heard about it back then. The murder of Richard Jones is a completely mysterious case till this day. The villains seem to just have disappeared from the face of the world. Thank you, Endeavor, Jones said. Why would this villains just disappear? Iida spoke up. I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, they were able to find out about a secret project, managed to break in her without any heroes stopping them, and then they just stop? That is what the police had been trying to find out for the last 6 years, Endeavor replied. Despite all this tragedy, there was at least enough of the work of my father left to start over again and rebuild his invention and complete his lifework in his place, Jones said. As you might know, my father was quirkless and I myself only have a weak quirk, but this was his way to still change the world, and I want to finish it. Quirkless. The thought went through Izuku's mind. Like he used to be for most of his life, How often had he been told that he was worthless and that he would never achieve anything? That is the reason I called you all here and offered you all a large extra fee. Now that I am about to finish the work of my father, I fear that these people, or others like them, will come back. At the same time at the entrance, Toga, now in the shape of a security guard, had just entered the building. She remembered what Shigaraki had told them all. Their "new friend" had given them all access codes to the facility and all information about this "secret project" they were working on here. All she had to do now was literally opening the doors and walk inside. Meanwhile, the others would set up the distraction for this pesky heroes. The conference room. Sir, Endeavor-san. An employee of HCP came running into the room. It is just in the news. A fire has broken out in the city. Several buildings are on fire, just a few kilometers away. The pro heroes on the table all exchanged a look, the teachers included. It seems we are needed, Edgeshot said. This could just be a distraction to get to my company, Jones reminded them. Of course it could be, Endeavor replied, but as heroes we have the duty to protect the people. Some of the others in the room, in first line his son Shoto, knew how ironic these words were from him. For years he had only cared about being number one and had even used his own wife and children as tools for that end. But I think we are lucky. The students can help out here after all, right Eraserhead, Vlad King? He turned to the two teachers. They can, Eraserhead, Aizawa, answered. Okay. You all will be assisting in the rescue operation, Vlad King announced. A few of the pro heroes will go with them too. But most of us will stay here and guard this facility, Best Jeanist declared. I will guard the device itself, Endeavor said. Don't worry Mr. Jones, we will make sure nothing happens to it. Damn it, I would have rather stayed here, Bakugo hissed. Rescue operations were never really my thing. Then stay, Endeavor said. You are right, you are more useful here. If you allow it of course Eraser. Aizawa just shrugged. He has a point Bakugo, he said. You were always better in fighting than in Rikyu. Okay, stay here. But don't leave the sight of the pros. Now to the rest of you. Get moving. The others are already on their way. He turned to Izuku, Ochako, Tsuyu, Momo Yaoyorozu and Najire. One of the former Big Three students of UA. And one sometimes a bit airheaded seeming girl, who had been watching the exchange. Iida with his speed, just like most of the others in all of Class B, had already left. As Izuku and the others were running across the corridors a few minutes later, they were coming across a number of security guards. As they run past one of them however, he noticed that the guard was staring at him in what looked like surprise. Why would a guard be surprised about seeing a group of UA students? For sure they had been informed of their visit. Suddenly a thought came to him. Aizawa-sensei, can you please wait a moment, he called out. There is something. What is it Midoriya? He asked. We are in a hurry right now. I need you to use your power on this guard over there. He pointed at the man a few meters from them, who suddenly looked quite nervous. I have a suspicion. Aizawa and the others knew instantly what he meant. Like his name suggested, Eraserhead was able to suppress the quirks of other by looking at them. The guard changed back into her true form. Toga, Momo said. A moment later they had the villain surrounded and the other guards had pointed their guns at her. Very good instincts Midoriya, Aizawa commented. This time you cannot escape, Ochako said to her. Hey Ochako, Sue, Izuku-kun. Have you seen the news about us? She asked awkwardly. It is great, isn't it? Izuku said nothing. How did you get in here? Aizawa asked Toga. Even if you have copied a guard, there are several security measures. Now, why would I tell you that? Toga asked him with a wide smile. See it like that, Tsuyu said. The more we have to deal with, the greater is the chance that we might get distracted and you can escape again. What? Ribbit? The frog girl asked as she saw other heroes staring at her. Okay. I will tell you, Toga said. We have a man on the inside of course. Our "new friend," as Shigaraki-kun calls him. He has given us all the access codes and also the entire layout of this place. What? Nearly all of them called out. Even the usually stoic Eraserhead looked unsettled. Check the security system, he said to the guards. Oh, you don't need to worry. I have already deactivated it a few minutes ago, Toga stated. And I have cut a few cables, so don't think about just shutting it on again. Damn it, Aizawa hissed. If the security is down and if they truly know the entire complex, then nothing keeps Kurogiri from just teleporting them in, Ochako said, ending his thoughts. And Endeavor, he is alone in the machine room, Izuku reminded them. He will be killed. We need to help him. Something is blocking the communications, one of the guards said. We cannot warn the rest of the building. I will go and tell the other heroes, Najire told them. You can go and help Endeavor, she said to Eraserhead and the others. Okay, he answered. You guards warn your colleagues and every hero you see. Villains have invaded the building. Deku, what is going on? Why are you coming back? Bakugo, who was standing next to Edgeshot, asked as he saw them a minute later. Then his eyes fell on the now secured Toga. The League of Villains is here, Aizawa told them. Someone on the inside had sold out their so-called secret project and gave them free access to the building, and Endeavor is alone. A moment later they heard the sounds of fighting breaking out all around them. Suddenly the wall beside them cracked and was broken down by a large Numu, who was charging at them, until a barrage of explosions from Bakugo stopped it. Numu, engineered beings with multiple quirks, created from humans, the work of All for One. Behind it they saw the villains Mr. Compress, Twice or one of his clones and a few others they didn't recognize fighting with a number of other heroes. Go. Help Endeavor, Edgeshot said. I will take care of this thing. As they arrived in the room of the portal, the scene greeting them didn't surprise them. They saw Endeavor in a fight with two more Numu and the League member Dabi. They instantly moved in. Bakugo being the first, literally throwing himself at the Numu with blazing hands. Quickly followed by Izuku and the rest. They had to bring the now shackled Toga with them, since all other they met had been busy fighting and they had not time to lock her up somewhere. So Ochako was standing back and keeping an eye on her. Aizawa used his quirk to erase the powers of one of the Numu, that made it easier for the other students to take it down. Izuku landed a punch, cracking several ribs of the monster and the Bakugo blew its head off. While heroes did everything to avoid killing people, these creatures had no longer any humanity left in them, and many even considered taking them out of their misery a mercy. Meanwhile the fire and the villain attack in Kyoto were now on the news back at UA Academy. Toshinori Yagi, alias All Might, was one of the teachers watching them. Even after a full year, it was still frustrating to him that he was now helpless and could do nothing. I hope you and the others are okay, young Midoriya, he thought. The fight was going well for them. Eraserhead and the students had by now managed to cause heavy damage to the second Numu, with Izuku and Bakugo attacking it directly and Tsuyu and Momo acting as a distraction. Izuku just landed a hard kick that sent it down. Not bad, Deku, Bakugo acknowledged. But then something happened. They could not even really say for sure what had caused it. Probably the last attack the Numu sent out and that Bakugo had dodged. As it had turned out, the creature also possessed an electrical quirk that it had not used so far. A bit like their classmate Deki. The electric charge it sent out barely missed Bakugo, but hit the computer controlling the gateway instead, and the machine came to life. In the center of the metal construction a light blue shimmering globe of energy was forming, a hole in space, and started to beat the air out of the room. Endeavor, Eraserhead and Dabi were the closest and instantly beeped were gone before they even realized what was happening. Followed by Su, Momo and Bakugo. What the foo? He shouted as he was blown into the wormhole. Toga, who could not hold herself anywhere, was next. No, that. She called out, but she had no chance. Only Ochako managed to hold, by grabbing something at the wall and reducing her own weight to 0. Deku. Try to take my hand, she shouted, but it was too late. In opposite to her, Izuku didn't manage to get a hold anywhere. He tried to use his powers to cause air pressure like he had done before, to get away from the gate. But the pull was just too strong. Ochako, he called out, as he was beeped through the gateway. Then it was over. The machine shut down again and the wormhole collapsed. No, Ochako said, horrified as she saw what happened. They were all gone. As they backed to their senses a short time later, they looked around to find out where they were. What Izuku saw shocked him completely. This here was clearly the same town district. He could make out the same streets and even some of the same buildings he had seen as they came here. But at the same time it was different. The entire district looked somehow changed from what they remembered, more run down, older. Some of the buildings he remembered were not longer there and replaced by others. The greatest difference, however, was, the entire HCP facility was not longer there. Where are we? Suyu asked. They had all come back to their feet now, including the two villains under them. You are under arrest, Dabi, Endeavor said to him. Don't try to flee. You are actually serious, aren't you? Endeavor? He asked. Have you taken a look around here? Do you remember what this gateway is? There is to telling where we have landed and we have no way back. Endeavor grimaced. That might be. But we are still heroes, and until we know otherwise, it is our duty to stop you, Eraserhead stated. So give up, Leatherface. You have no chance, Bakugo grinned. I guess that leave me no choice, Dabi said. He moved his arms forwards, in a gesture as if he wanted to surrender. But then he moved his hand to raise a wall of fire between them instead. Run, he yelled to Toga, who only gave a short nod and followed him. After them, Endeavor called out. They were following the two fleeing villains, but only for a short time. As soon as they had crossed the second street corner, they found both of them standing still and staring with open mouths at something before them. So much. They heard Toga whisper in awe. So much blood. But even her usual bloodlust seemed to be mixed with shock. As they followed their gaze, they froze as well. Hanging from both sides of the street were the dead bodies of dozens of people. Some had been pierced on long wooden pikes. Others were nailed on makeshift crosses and their bodies cut open. And blood was flowing everywhere down onto the street. Who would do something like that? Izuku stammered. I don't know, Suyu whispered. I think I am getting sick. Even Bakugo, Aizawa and Endeavor were white like sheets. What kind of sick bastards have done this? Bakugo whispered. In some distance they noticed one of these large screens that were mounted at the side of buildings and normally showed hero advertising or something like that. But this showed right now something completely different. Next to the face of a young female newscaster, were glimpses of a battlefield. In the center of the scene was a dark figure in some kind of black robe, who was fighting with something. A bizarre thing. A monster. It was an abomination like out of their worst nightmares. All they could make out were long gray tentacles and a monstrous wide maw with long pointed teeth raging out of it and a pair of deep yellow eyes. In a grotesque's large and thick body with deathly gray skin and carried by giant crude legs. In the background they could make out the leveled and burned out remains of a city. They realized with some horror that it was Paris, as they saw the crushed remains of the Eiffel Tower. Do you still want to arrest us, F.A. Endeavor? Dabi asked. It is now 9 years since the first invasion of the Nameless Ones, they heard the news announcer saying. Just where had they landed? They all asked themselves. Do you still want to arrest us, F.A. Endeavor? Dabi asked. The words from Dabi were going through Endeavor's, aka Enji Todoroki's, mind. He tried to push his personal feelings on the matter down. On a technical level he knew the villain was right. They were trapped at an unknown place with no real way to get back. And going by the corpses hanging from the walls and the news about apocalyptic battle, there was clearly something hostile here. On the other side there was no way they could trust them. Despite that, or maybe exactly because of what he knew about Dabi. They saw the TV broadcast continue. In the 8 years and 9 months, since the First Battle of Europe had halted the advance of the Nameless Ones over our planet and the reign of our dark saviors had begun, we had to make many sacrifices, the female announcer said. But we have also grown. Under the guidance of our new masters, we have finally realized the mistakes and failures of the past and started to leave them behind. Our complete dependence on imperfect quirks and so-called heroes, who in the end failed to protect us and didn't make a difference. What is she talking about, Ribbit? Suyu asked. I don't cow, Momo said, but I have a bad feeling. So-called heroes? Endeavor repeated irritated. The ever-present weakness in the population. The missing of any real technological and scientific progress. The lack of initiative and the naive belief that "heroes will save us from any danger." We have done our best to erase this flaws from our society. But of course not all of our fellow citizens were worthy or willing to accept the truth. We are still fighting to eradicate these elements that are still clinging to an overcome way of thinking. Despite that, we are stepping forward into the future under our new regime and under the guidance of our masters. All hail the supreme ruler. All hail our young governor and his enforcers. And all hail the Dark Order. Their eyes fell on the current date, displayed at the bottom of the screen. A bit over 2 years in the future. But they had said all this here had started over 9 years ago. So wherever they were, it was obviously not their own future. What the is going on here? Bakugo asked, stunned from what he had just seen and heard. That is a good question, Aizawa, Eraserhead stated. But it seems heroes are not all too popular here. So we should better hide our uniforms. If I guessed, I would say this world had faced some kind of invasion. Probably from these monstrous creatures we have just seen. And our hero counterparts here had failed to stop them. But these masters, whoever they are, had managed to, and then they have taken over. You mean someone has taken advantage of the situation and toppled the government? Endeavor commented. Yes. That was my impression too. The two captured villains Dabi and Toga exchanged a short look at their conversation. Invasion? Izuku asked. You mean like, from space? Maybe, Aizawa replied, or maybe from some other dimension. Given the gateway we just came through, that wouldn't even be that far off. Who gives a damn? Bakugo said. They were being overrun by monsters and no hero had managed to stop it. Moment. Izuku cut in, when again had Mr. Jones said his father had activated the first version of the gateway. About 6.5 years ago, I think. Bakugo answered impatient. Why do you ask, Deku? And we are around 2.5 years in the future from our time. That makes together around 9 years, Tsuyu exclaimed. Do you think there is a connection? I see, Aizawa said. You think the gateway is somehow responsible for what had happened here? This caused another short silent exchange between Dabi and Toga. I am not sure, Izuku admitted. It doesn't matter right now, Endeavor declared. What we need now is to find out more about this world here and find a place to stay until they manage to bring us back. If they managed to, they all thought, but nobody spoke this out aloud. But should we not do anything to help the people here? Izuku called out. And how should we do that, if we are not even sure who we should help and who is part of the problem? Aizawa responded. For all we know, we could end up making things even worse. Well, he wasn't sure, but they had to do something, anything, Izuku thought. Our responsibility is our own world, Endeavor said, not this one. Very heroic of you, Dabi commented sarcastically. It is no wonder that you have so many admirers, Toga added with a wide grin. Shut up you two, Endeavor snarled. Your stupid comments are not helping at all. Dabi, he thought. He had found out the terrible truth about this villain just a few months ago. Like I said before, we are willing to help. If you let us. Dabi raised his arms to show the handcuffs. At least until we are able to return. Yeah, let us help you. Izuku-kun, my love, and Sue. We are friends after all, Toga stated. Your idea of friendship is to cut people up and drink their blood, Tsuyu said bluntly. Of course. That is my way to show someone that I care about them. But I wouldn't do it in a way that kills them. I would not kill a friend. At least not on purpose, not anymore, she admitted a bit shyly. It is just, when I see the blood flowing, I can just not longer hold back. That is not exactly very reassuring, Toga-chan, Izuku said. Chan? Had he just actually called her that? He thought. That is a bad idea, Endeavor, Eraserhead pointed out as well, referring to Dabi's offer to cooperate. We don't know anything about this place. For all we know, they could team up against us together with whoever did this. He gestured to the hanging dead bodies. You have a point here, Endeavor replied. He looked at the two villains. In some distance they noticed a few people walking out of a side street, 2 men and 2 women. They were looking like normal citizens. Hey, Izuku called out, can you help us? Please tell us who had done this. But the people were just staring at them distrustfully and then turned back into the alley they came from. Hey, Izuku shouted. Assholes, Bakugo growled. They nearly act as if we are the enemy here. Who knows? Maybe we are, Suyu commented. For all we know, we might all be villains in this world. Su-chan. Please don't talk like this, Momo said. Our entire situation is bad enough as it is. Sorry, she replied. Eraserhead turned to Momo. Yaoyorozi, he said. If you please use your quirk to make us some coasts and a few shoes? Something that draws less attention. Of course, she replied. Momo's quirk allowed her to create all kinds of objects, transforming the fat of her own body. Like for example now a few sets of coats for all of them, that they used to hide their hero uniforms. Then let us go, Endeavor said a few minutes later as they had dressed up and hidden their hero outfits. We were standing around her far too long, he said with a side glance at the hanging corpses. They continued their way through the town. Suyu was going a short distance ahead of them, using her camouflage ability to scout the area and look out for possible threats. But not that far away that they would be able to interfere if she got into any actual danger. Because of that she was also the only one of them still in her full outfit. At first they were trying to find the local town library, but as they had finally found it, they saw that it had been closed and everything removed. Izuku had suggested finding a computer somewhere and searching the internet for information. But Aizawa pointed out that all public internet access points might be monitored, and, since these people were obviously living under some kind of dictatorship, this might especially be true if someone was looking for information regarding the rise of the regime. Their best solution right now was also the most easy one: finding someone who was willing to talk and question them for information. After another half hour, they finally found someone. It was a group of armed men, in some kind of military uniforms and body armor. Right behind them was an armored vehicle they had obviously been using. Okay. This would not have necessarily been a calming picture. Had it not been for the presence of the person in front of the men. They all recognized her easily. Izuku felt his mood brighten up. At least for the moment. Finally they had found a familiar face. Back in their own world, the fight between the heroes and the League had now fully broken out. With the major part of the fight taking part right in front of the HCP building. The hero students had arrived at the line of houses that were on fire a few minutes earlier, the work of Dabi most likely. Police and firefighters had already arrived to help the citizens who had not managed to leave the building yet, just like a few of the local heroes. Iida Tenya and Kendo Itsuka were starting to direct their two classes in their aid of the rescue attempts. They all froze however for a moment, as they saw the forms of Shigaraki and Kurogiri standing on top of one of the buildings. The League was responsible for this, and this fire was probably only a distraction. Then they only saw how Kurogiri transported them both away. Kurogiri. Tenya remembered how they all heard the news of his escape. It had been on a prisoner transfer to Tartaros. The vehicle had been found at the side of the street. The pro-hero overviewing the transport had been found close by, burned to death and with a knife wound in his side. His sidekick stabbed in the heart from a short distance. Two of the group of police guards had also been burned and two others had their necks broken. Another had his face disintegrated. The body of the last guard had been missing, until it was found a few days later in a river several miles from his home. The killers had obviously been Dabi, Toga and Shigaraki, and another member of the League or maybe Inomu. As the police had reconstructed the incident, Toga must have impersonated the missing guard and used his appearance to get close to and stab both the hero and his sidekick, after they had been confronted by Shigaraki, Dabi and the third person who were waiting for them on the street. But that meant they must have known the time and the exact route of the transport. The question was, how? Right now they had to concentrate on the matter at hand. They had to help. They have disappeared, Itsuka said to him. Do you think too that this is a distraction? I do, he replied. But that is the job of the pros. We have to trust them. Ours is to save as many people as possible. They coordinated their efforts with the firefighters and police forces present who were already helping. Tenya used his speed to bring people to safety, Shoto his ice powers to extinguish the fire at places they knew were without people, and Monoma was helping him by copying his quirk and doing the same from the other side of the building. And most of the others were helping in whatever ways they could. Back at the HCP building, the League had by now engaged the superheroes. Shigaraki. And two clones, looking identical to him, Kurogiri, Mr. Compress, Spinner and currently a dozen copies of Twice. We're facing Edgeshot, Gang Orca, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Mount Lady and several others. The plan was working out nearly perfectly, Shigaraki thought. Only that they had not heard from Dabi or Toga yet. But he was sure they would soon. Things however turned out different from what he had expected. In this moment Gang Orca was getting a message from inside the building. Orca, can you hear me? It was the hero Vlad King, who was also the teacher of UA's Hero Class 1B. Something terrible has happened. We just found Uraraka alone in the secret project's room. She is under shock. But she managed to tell us that Endeavor, Eraserhead, Midoriya, Bakugo, Asui and Yaoyorozu have all disappeared. And also the villains Toga and Dabi. What? It comes even worse. She told us that the "secret project" had malfunctioned and somehow sent them all away. Damn it, it couldn't have turned out any worse, Orca thought. Except it did. He realized that the two villains Shigaraki and Kurogiri had just overheard their conversation. A foolish mistake on his part. But he had simply not expected something like this. But on the other side, since it also concerned two of their own, maybe they could even use this to get the villains to stop their attack for the moment. You heard this, Shigaraki? Kurogiri asked rhetorically. I see, Toga and Dabi. Maybe we should retreat for the moment until we have the chance to find out more about what happened to them. But before they could do that, all of them was suddenly faced with a surprise, as a volley of bullets were shot at both the heroes and the villains alike. Mount Lady was hit a few times, which could really be avoided, since she was in her giant form. But for the same reason the bullets didn't went very deep and caused only light damage. As they turned around to the source of the shots, they saw a group of people standing at the border of the company ground. They had obviously come closer while they all were fighting each other. The strange thing, however, was that all of these figures were wearing priest clothes. Standing in front of the group was one of two women in some kind of nun outfit. She was Asian looking and had shoulder-long brown hair. Even more bizarre, as they took a closer look, they saw that the crosses these clerics were wearing were all upside down. Hey, who in the world are these freaks? Shigaraki asked. Sister Katsuragi, one of the fake priests, addressed the woman standing in front of their group, who took one more step forward before she started to speak. We are the faithful followers of the Church of Chaos, she called out. We know about the blasphemies that are being done here and inside this building, and we are here to end them. She sent a look to the villains, false prophets of chaos and terror, and then to the hero group and fake heroes. Don't stand in our way or feel our wrath. They all looked a bit confused. None of them was completely sure what to make of these people. The woman and her compatriots, however, activated their quirks, with one of the men behind her looking especially terrifying, with an oil-like black substance flowing out of his body and completely surrounding him, forming long sharp claws around his hands and a monstrous face, with large white eyes and a wide maw and sharp teeth over his human one. We are the bringer of your death, the creature growled. You can call us Claw. Inside the building, the hero and support curse teacher Powerloader was just informing the company owner. Mr. Jones, he said, a new group has just arrived outside. Not part of us or the league. We don't know who they are. I understand, he replied. Then these are probably the people I originally wanted to protect my company against. Sir, it was not the League of Villains who attacked us the last time. It was not them who killed my father, he reminded him. The most important thing you have to do now is to protect the gateway. Remember, it is the only way to bring your colleagues and the children back after this accident. It didn't matter, he thought. All he needed was to open the gateway one more time, and then there would be nothing they can do. And now he had an entire army of heroes to defend it. It would all turn out right. The other world, there was no doubt. It was her. Or at least this world's version of her. Ochako. Izuku called out. Nearly in the same moment he realized that this might not have been the wisest decision. Just like this entire world, it was pretty clear that this was not the same Uraraka they knew. She was wearing what looked like a darker colored version of her hero outfit from home. And she was a couple of years older, of course. The others had also decided to come closer. While it was true that this Uraraka Ochako before them was technically a stranger, Sooner or later they would have to talk to someone. They had already tried to find out more information about the place in other ways after all. Without any success so far. So actually talking to some of the natives was the best way left. And Uraraka was certainly not a worse choice than anyone else. At least they hoped so. Dekiru, she called out to greet him as she saw them. Dekiru? He just thought confused. He remembered this version of his hero name, of course. It meant so much as "you can do it." Ochaku had told him it sounded just like Deku. What was originally an insult invented by Kachan. The form "Dekiru", however, had only been brought up a single time, at that day. Since then it had always been Deku. Still he looked at Ochako's face, right into her big brown eyes. They were certainly the same. The group of men with the guns behind Uraraka was standing back, not coming closer, and obviously leaving the talking to her. One of them had a quirk that made him practically look like a cat walking on two legs. Another had slightly overlong arms. The rest was looking completely regular, without any signs of their quirks. "I am glad to see you," Izuku said to her. Even he himself wasn't completely sure how much of this words were true. Now that they had come closer, Uraraka was looking at them all for a few seconds, obviously confused. "Thank you. But, Dekiru-kun, has the support department experimented with an de-aging quirk again, or are you simply all clones?" Uraraka said. "I mean, you look so young," she stated. "Not that it isn't kind of cute," she remarked with a typically bright smile. She seemed truly quite like the Uraraka they knew so far. "No, it is really me. I mean I am not a clone," Izuku said nervously. He didn't want to lie to her, but he knew that it was probably better not to say the whole truth here, at least not right away. "I get it. You were going out incognito." "Why yes," he replied. Technically it was the truth, he thought. "And you managed to catch Toga and another rebel," Uraraka said. "Wow. But you have to admit this guy is really looking badass. With his face actually stitched to his head and so." Toga, a rebel? They all questioned. Her eyes drifted over the others. "Hey. This guy looks exactly like that pathetic hero wannabe Bakugo Katsuki." She grinned. "Don't tell me you had that idiot cloned Dekiru?" "What?" Bakugo gritted his teeth. He wanted to step forward to give that round-faced bitch a piece of his mind. But then she continued. "I thought you still have his skull as a souvenir somewhere?" Bakugo and Izuku both froze in their movements. She couldn't just have said what they thought she did, right? "And that guy here looks a bit like the dead hero Endeavor, except for the scar," she commented. Endeavor. Dead. They all took in this piece of information. It was not that much of a surprise with the state the world was obviously in. Enji Todoroki himself was doing his best to keep his features straight. "Miss Uraraka," Aizawa addressed her carefully, "it is just so. We have just found a number of dead people that were hung up at the street." He had his long hair in a ponytail and was wearing sunglasses that Momo had made for him, so even if there existed a Eraserhead here, the chance of him being recognized was low, unless she knew him personally. "Oh, you have already seen it?" Uraraka asked. She turned to Izuku. "I know it was not really my job to do. But we have already brought out the sacrifices for this town. So I thought, why not finish them by myself?" What? They all shouted inside their minds. "Why you killed these people?" Izuku stammered. "Of course. I know it was not truly my duty right now, but I just wanted to show you that I can do this. Did you like it, Dekiru-kun?" she asked sweetly. No, this could not be," Izuku told himself. This could not truly be Uraraka. This had to be Toga or some other villain in disguise or something. Toga, who was right over there. They all were staring at her in shock. Even Toga was looking at her with an open mouth. Uraraka took a step closer to their two captives. "Hello, Himiko-chan. Nice to see you again," she greeted her. "I like what you have done with your hair, by the way. It makes you look even more like a schoolgirl." Thanks. Now, what shall we do with you? You know, I truly don't want to kill you. We're friends after all. You said so yourself, right?" she said cheerfully. "Yes, I did," Toga replied nervously. "Good, then why don't you come back to us? You would just have to kill a few people to prove yourself." "You truly want me to kill?" she asked. Of course I do, silly. How else would we show our devotion and our will to better the world, if we don't kill people? Uraraka said with a bright smile. She sounded as if her logic was completely obvious. We could even let you have all their blood, Himiko. Entire bathtubs full if you want, just for you. Because we are friends. We have more than enough after all. Toga actually had a dreamy expression on her face for a moment at the image, before she turned serious again. Okay, they all thought. This Uraraka here was completely insane. Oh Ochako. How can you say something like that? Izuku asked. Uraraka just looked at him. Then suddenly she drew a gun out of her outfit and pointed it right at Izuku. The rest of her men followed her example and aimed at the others. Tell me, who exactly are you? Something about you was strange from the beginning. But now I am completely sure that you are not Dekiru, she told him. You won't believe me if I told you, he said. Why don't you let me the judge of that, she said. You know something, run-face bitch. Why don't you shut your trap? Bakugo exclaimed. Listening to your psycho drabble is driving me crazy. You make even Vampire Girl here look sane in comparison. What did you just say? Uraraka shouted in pure anger. Bakugo was already charging up a couple of explosions in his hands. The others were getting instantly ready to fight as well. Izuku had activated full cowl and got into a fighting position. Tsuyu was doing the same thing and Momo had created a weapon for herself. Endeavor activated his flames and Aizawa was taking his sunglasses off, ready to erase their opponent's quirks. But then something happened what truly none of them had expected. One of the gunmen suddenly turned around to his compatriots and fired his machine gun at them. Whoever this was, he had just killed 4 of their own men. Uraraka however turned around with her own gun in her hand, looking even more enraged as she saw what had happened than before. Traitor, she shouted. But before she could do anything, Tsuyu had thrown out her tongue and wrapped it around her arms, while Aizawa had negated her quirk. Before anyone else said something, their mysterious ally stepped forward and knocked her out with the butt of his gun. Who are you? Aizawa asked the surviving gunman. No time to explain, he answered. You just killed your own comrades, Izuku said. They were never my comrades. I had infiltrated their group. And these guys would have killed you all without a second thought, he told them grimly. Just like they killed these other people, so don't be all too sad about them. The man took out a handy from his pocket and dealt a number. It is me, he said. I need you to get me, now. Wait for me at the meeting point. And I bring a few people around you will find very interesting. It seems everything we found out about the gateway is actually true. He turned back to them. Are you coming? The man asked them. They were all looking at each other unsure. Listen, I am with the rebels, and I really don't want to wait here until more of them show up, he said. You see, we might not quite live up to whatever high moral standards you have. And some of us might even look like people you know as enemies. He sent a look to Toga, and to Dabi, especially to Toga. But right now we are the closest thing to friends you have. So are you coming? Or shall I leave you on your own? Okay. Endeavor gave in. We are coming with you. What is your name anyway? Aizawa asked. You will find out very soon, the man replied. He was suddenly sounding a bit insecure, they realized. But for now we should get away from here quickly. They knew he had a point here. The man stepped closer to Toga and Dabi and went to remove their handcuffs. What are you doing? Endeavor asked sharply. In case you haven't noticed yet, we can need every man, he replied. And beside that it is not a good idea to walk around here with shackled prisoners anyway. People could think you were government enforcers. He pointed to the unconscious alternate Uraraka, and be either scared as hell of you or attack you. So if you have a key to this cuffs, you better give them to me. They all remembered the people who had run away from them earlier. That explained a lot. Endeavor finally nodded and threw him the keys over and he released the 2 villains. Then let us go, the man said. It are just a few kilometers. The man stared at Uraraka for a few seconds, but then decided to leave her behind. I can barely believe that I say that, but it is nice to see you, Izuku, their new friend said to him a few minutes later. You know me? Yes, we have been close once, the gunman said a bit reluctant. Sorry, but I have never seen you before in my life, Izuku replied. The man didn't respond. I knew Ochako as well. We have been friends, he said a bit awkwardly. Is that the reason you have not killed her like the others? Tsuyu asked him. Partly, it was also because she was helpless. I just couldn't do it. Maybe you should find yourself better friends, Bakugo commented. Yes, maybe, he replied. You know about the gateway? Izuku asked him. Everyone here does, he replied. It is the reason all this here happened. They came though it. You mean these Ing monsters? Bakugo stated. The nameless ones, yes. They overrun the half-world before anyone managed to stop them. All Might died fighting them. They all were looking horrified at this statement. They had expected something like this, but to her it confirmed. And then they were quickly followed by the Dark Order, who took over the other half, the gunman continued. And it is all the fault of that bastard, he growled. Who do you mean? Momo asked. Who? The man who had opened the gate for them, Richard Jones, he answered. Richard Jones was just a company owner, Aizawa pointed out. His experiment might had terrible consequences, but he had not known. Yes. That is what he made everyone believe, the man interrupted him. He had everyone fooled, he and his wretched family. They had known, from the beginning. Before they could say anything else, they had already reached the meeting point, and froze as they recognized one of the two people waiting for them. Kurogiri, Izuku called out. You can calm down, the second person said to them casually. They realized that they were looking at a nearly copy of Mr. Aizawa. Only that this Eraserhead had a scar at the side of his face and his hair was a bit shorter just shoulder long, than that of their teacher. Whatever Kurogiri is to you, he is a member of the resistance like all of us. He is a villain, Aizawa said to his double. It is true that he had worked for the former governor All for One a long time ago, Aizawa too admitted. But he has changed sides when the purges had started and he has been loyal ever since. Can we go now? I don't feel like being discovered and getting into a needless fight. Okay, Endeavor responded, since you are the first people we met here who had not either pointed weapons at us or run away, we will trust you. For now, he thought. Kurogiri transported them away. They reappeared a moment later in a building full of people. Most of them they never met before, but there was also another known face, Mei Hatsume. Hey, you are back, she greeted them. Wow, she said as she saw them closer. Himiko had really not understated as she said our visitors would be interesting. Ko, Izuku and Bakugo called out nearly at the same time. They stared at the man, who had led them here and those forms suddenly began to change, revealing a very familiar girl. Oh look, it was me the entire time, Toga called out giggling. This Toga was wearing her hair open and she too was looking good 2 years older. But otherwise she was the same. Hey, she just said to them. Yes, very interesting guests indeed, another voice spoke up coming from a person who was just entering the room. Especially since their existence alone proves all the information we had discovered. Izuku froze inside even more as he recognized this voice. Stain, he whispered. The man was not wearing his typical mask, but otherwise everything was the same. Shizo Makagiro, aka the hero killer Stain. They were standing inside a run-down building, that seemed to be one of the bases of the resistance. They were however not even quite sure yet what exactly this resistance was, and what exactly they were resisting against. Only that it was some kind of organization called the Dark Order, what they had heard from a public newscast. That was, as it seemed, controlling the current government, and that it included the familiar faces of both, close friends and fierce enemies. But these people were not exactly the same. Their short encounter with a completely psychotic version of their friend Uraraka more than proved this. It was only a few hours ago that they had ended up in this horrible world, and now they were standing in front of the same man they knew as the hero killer. But here, as it looked, he was a leading member of the resistance. Now, that isn't my favorite fake hero. How are you, Endi? Stain greeted him mockingly. Izuku and most of the others could barely hold themselves back from laughing out as they heard the ridiculous nickname. Momo actually grinned wildly and was shaking from suppressed giggles. Tsuyu smirked. Bakugo just grimaced. Secretly to hide his own grin. Even Aizawa, both versions of him actually, had a barely visible smile on his face. The two captured villains, however, saw no reason to hold back. Dobby just grinned at him in near open satisfaction. At least as far it was visible with his disfigured face. But not more. Endeavor now knew about the secret connection between them, but the others here did not. And for now he wanted to leave it at that. Toga, however, broke out into loud and wild laughter. "Endy, that is so cute." She nearly purred. "Could you cut it down, you all?" "Well, me," the other Toga said to her. "I don't think this is helping anyone." But she was grinning as well. Only Shoto was not smiling at all and just staring wordlessly. "That's Endeavor or Todoroki to you, you bastard," the number one hero replied angrily. "I won't be treated like a fool. Especially not by the likes of you." "No, actually that is exactly how you will be treated as long as you are here. I can guarantee you that." Stain grinned. "Believe me, nobody has any kind of respect left for you after your humiliating end." "I think that is enough, Stain," Aizawa's double said sharply. "We're here to explain the situation to them. And maybe help each other. Not to unnecessarily rile any of them up." The expression of the man who would under different circumstances been the hero killer changed into one more stern and serious. "You are right," he admitted. "The time to hold on to old grudges in long over." "Humiliating end?" their own Aizawa asked, his curiosity stirred now. "What exactly has happened here? To Endeavor? To the entire world?" "Yes. You have not been here for long, right?" Stain replied. "You came here through the gateway. From another world. One where all this here had never happened, is that correct?" They all nodded. You are taking this all quite well," Izuku stated. "I mean us actually being from another dimension and all." "Boy, we are facing an invasion from another dimension and fighting a war for 9 years now," Stain replied. "Do you think a story like your can still impress us? You should know that these two here are dangerous villains where we come from. No matter what they may be here," Aizawa stated, gestured to Toga and Dobby. "Heroes and villains, oh yes. You should know that these labels don't have that much meaning anymore here," Stain replied. Toga showed a wide smile at his words, while Dobby didn't seem to react at all. "Here you are either a supporter of the regime or a so-called "loyal citizen, or you are with the resistance. Either that or you are dead or worse, a puppet of the nameless ones." He sighed. "I guess where you come from, I am a villain as well," he continued. "Or at least someone you would call one. If things happened differently, my ideas would have for sure caused me to take out at least a few of these so-called heroes." "You can say that," Bakugo spoke up. "You are actually known as the hero killer," Izuku mentioned. "I see, I am not surprised. Like I said, I had similar plans here. But in this world though my cause has long lost all meaning. Pro-heroes don't exist anymore. Not that much of them were a great loss. But that nightmare that took their place nearly let me wish back for the "good old times." "No heroes," Izuku said in shock. "But," Momo stammered. Their entire society was pretty much built up on the concept of heroes. That they were actually meaningless here. It was hard for them to wrap their minds around it. "How could it come to this?" Aizawa finished the question. "What is the Dark Order? These nameless ones, by what I concluded, are these monstrous things we have seen on the news. And how comes everyone here seems to know about the gateway, despite that it was a secret project?" "Good questions," Stain replied stoically. To make it short, 9 years ago Richard Jones had opened the portal he called the Gateway and so created a door for the nameless ones into our world. And yes, he did know what he was doing. In fact, this was the true purpose of the Gateway from the beginning. Why should he have done something like that? Endeavor asked loud. As it turned out, Stain explained, Jones and his entire family had been leaders of a secret cult that had somehow fallen under the influence and was worshipping the nameless ones for generations. And now he had found a way to offer his masters our planet. In exchange for a share of the power for himself, of course. The nameless ones, sometimes they are also called the Old Ones, Aizawa too explained, they are a group of ancient monstrous malevolent entities. As it is said, they are dwelling in the emptiness between the worlds. Some of them are supposedly as old as time itself. They possess a kind of power that we can barely imagine and a hunger to corrupt and conquer everything in existence. But there are other forces out there that can actually match them and we're holding them in check. At least until someone here had found a way to bring them directly into our reality. Moment, Izuku suddenly said, if you say that Mr. Jones' entire family was part of this cult, then his son, he said he wanted to continue the work of his father. It seems the asshole had been playing us all the entire time, Bakugo commented, yeah right. Dabi and Toga exchanged a short look with each other. There is something you should know, Dabi finally said. Our attack right now was not a coincidence. This Jones and Shigaraki have some kind of agreement. He had asked for an alliance and wanted us to stage some kind of attack on his company. In exchange he had offered to supply the League with technology and weapons. Endeavor visibly gritted his teeth. Aizawa just frowned. This pretty much confirmed their worst expectations. So Mr. Jones had in fact actually tried to open a way for these creatures into our world the whole time, Aizawa summarized. And he had manipulated us all and even the League of Villains for that scheme. Bastards really got us, Bakugo grunted. I will blow up Hiss if I ever see him again. I will deal with Jones myself when we come back, Endeavor said. I will have his head for this. Izuku said nothing, but he balled his fist. He remembered that he actually looked up to Jones, for achieving all this despite being quirkless, but now? He remembered the recording they all had watched of Mr. Jones' father's death. What they had originally thought had been cold-blooded murder. Had these people instead known what was going on? Had they in truth prevented their world from a horrible fate? If we ever come back, Aizawa corrected him. There has to be a way, right? Momo called out. There is, right? Suyu asked insecurely in Stains and Aizawa2's direction. The gateway had brought us here, it should be able to bring us back, Izuku stated. It has never been built, don't you remember? Shoto pointed out. If the first one had succeeded, they never had a reason to. But the first one was. If it is still intact, we just have to find it. It could still be intact, right? He asked hopefully. As far as we know it is, Aizawa2 answered. But the gateway is in America. And America is the place where the Nameless Ones had first appeared. Before anyone could even do anything, they had overrun the entire continent. It was all turned into a lifeless wasteland. Whoever was not killed right away was been driven insane by their influence and changed, horrible mutated and turned into one of their servants. All Might had tried to stop them, but he didn't survive. Europe had been turned into not much more than a giant battlefield between the Nameless Ones and the Dark Order. Africa is the same. My God! This cannot be. This can all not be, Momo murmured, visibly shaking. Shoto was laying a hand on her shoulder reassuringly. He was also looking clearly distraught. We, the Eastern world, have been saved, if you can even call it that. But for that our countries had sold themselves to another group of devils. Maybe you should just show them the old newscasts, Toga said, not the Toga they had arrived with, but the one from this world. Good idea Himiko, Stain answered. Come with us, he said to their assembled guests. He led them to a room with a large TV set. As you have obviously realized by now, and that alone by the fact that you are here, there are more worlds than just our own. Far more, Stain explained. Until just a few years ago, as far as we can tell, our world was identical to yours. In fact they probably were the same. But then everything changed, as soon as the gateway was opened. Himiko came and handed him a couple of discs. He took one of them and pushed them into the red order. Then he activated the TV screen. The first scene they saw showed once again a completely devastated city. It was New York, they recognized. In the background they could make out the skyline of Manhattan. Or what was left of it. The Empire State Building had crumbled, with only the lower half still standing. But in the front, they also saw a figure they all knew perfectly well, All Might. Not in the weak and broken skeletal state he was in their world, but in his muscle form. It was like a scene directly out of their worst nightmares. The sky was dark and filled with clouds, of dust and ash. A storm was raging over the entire area. At some spots however, the sky seemed to be glowing in unnatural colors. Nearly like eyes that were watching the place from somewhere above. In the background, they could at several places see shadowy figures moving in unnatural ways. As if their twisted and deformed limbs did not longer allow them to walk normally. Somewhere between the ruined buildings, they could make out something moving that looked like large tentacles. The worst of it all, however, was probably the opponent All Might was fighting. And that exactly because he was both clearly to see and there were still parts of his once fully human form left. They all recognized the figure as Richard Jones. The same man they had watched getting killed in another recording before. Or at least it was something that resembled him. Yet what they saw was an abomination. His human body was still there, but it looked like it was horribly mutated. Or maybe merged with something else. At least 4 large monstrous tentacles were growing in different places out of his body. His skin had turned into an inhumanly gray color, the same shade as the tentacles. His were glowing brightly in a sickly yellow. And somehow this monster, that they had until now had thought of as nothing but an elder gentleman, was actually putting up and fight with All Might of all people. They watched in horror how one of the tentacles landed a vicious strike, at exactly the spot they knew All Might's injuries had to be. His fight with All for One had already happened in this world, going by the dates. The fight continued for another few moments, before it came to its decision. They saw All Might throw a powerful blow and shouting loud at the same time. It was one of his signature moves, they all recognized it. United States of Smash, probably his strongest attack. His fist just rammed through his opponent's body and left a large gaping hole in his chest. In the same moment, however, the monster struck as well. The top of one of the tentacles had reformed itself into a razor-sharp spike. And it cut even through All Might's body, leaving a large open wound across his chest. Both opponents were standing still for a short moment, looking at each other. Then Jones' body sank to the ground. All Might, however, was stumbling as well. They could see him bleeding heavily. He was looking bad, but he was still standing, barely. But then, the figures that had until now only been moving in the background were coming closer. They could now see clearly that it were even more horrible mutated humans. None of them to the same extent as Jones, but it was bad enough. And they were slowly coming closer to All Might. The recording ended. As you can imagine, All Might did not survive this, Stain explained. The helicopter that had recorded this newscast, however, had fled at that point. At All Might's own order. He himself had managed to return to a Na'vi ship waiting at the coast, after fighting his way out, but died from his injuries a short time later. So there was a chance that he might have been able to transfer One for All to someone else before he died, Izuku though, somewhere in between the horror of seeing all this before his eyes. That was the only consolation about this entire thing. That he didn't become like them, Stain said in a bitter tone. Izuku remembered that All Might was probably the only hero the Stain they knew respected and even admired. This can all not be, Momo said quietly, shaking her head in denial. Her words mirrored exactly what they all felt. All Might dead, the world overrun by monsters. It seemed all like a hellish nightmare. Many thought it was the beginning of the end of the world, this universe's Aizawa stated. He exchanged a short look with his comrades. But then a promise of help came in the most unbelievable way, Aizawa too continued. Our worlds are not the only ones out there. And this help came from somewhere else. But it had a price. A terrible one. It was a short time after All Might's death, that our world was contacted and saved by another force from outside, Stain continued. Or maybe you could call it being invaded by it. People are still debating about what to call it, Toga's double Himiko commented dryly. But it could be seen as both, I guess, she shrugged. What are you talking about? Endeavor asked. A few days after All Might fell, the remaining governments of this world were receiving a message. A message whose source could not be located, Stain explained. It came literally from nowhere. And it claimed to come from another reality and it offered to save us. As you can imagine, people were more than skeptical. Yes. But in exchange their terms were nothing else than to dissolve all governments and ultimately surrender complete control of the planet to them, the native Aizawa added. What? Endeavor, Izuku and nearly half of their teammates called out at the same time. And your people had agreed to this? Izuku asked. What choice did they have? Aizawa too questioned. It was either that or complete annihilation. America and most of the Western world were already gone. Europe was at the brink. But you are right, they only ended up making a deal with one group of devils to save us from another one. As a result, the countries of Japan, China, Korea, India, Russia and most of the Middle East are under the rule of a genocidal dictatorship. The massacre with the hung-up people you have seen outside and Ochako being a psychopath are a small part of the outcome of that deal, Himiko commented. But as you can imagine, a few people for sure still didn't accept this terms, Stain stated. He looked at Endeavor. Your counterpart being the first one. The day after the world received this message, some kind of portal suddenly opened, right in the middle of Tokyo. Just like it was announced it would in the original message, Stain explained. And our world would meet its new masters for the first time. With this words, Stain started to play the second recording. It showed them a scene that was clearly a picture of a district of the Japanese capital. The road before them was empty, blockaded from all sides by a large number of police forces. The neighboring building had been evacuated. Behind the barricade of policemen, however, a crowd of thousands of people was assembled, curious about what was about to happen. If there would be something to happen at all. Many actually believed that this all was nothing but a colossal hoax. A scheme by some kind of villain probably. Or just some kind of desperate joke. A message from another dimension? A demand to hand over control of the entire planet? It really sounded too fantastic. Or at least it would have until a couple months ago, before the Nameless Ones. Now they were already facing an invasion of monsters from another dimensional. Would another one really be all that surprising? Standing in the center of all of it, however, was a group of politicians. First of all, the Japanese Prime Minister and a couple members of his staff, and also ambassadors of China, India and Korea. And standing very close to them, a trio of heroes. The first of them was the former number 2, now number 1 hero, Endeavor. Next to him were Best Jeanist and Edgeshot. All three of them were top 10 heroes. They were here to help to deal with this situation, in one way or the other. If it was truly a hoax, they would arrest whoever was responsible. If not, then, they were not sure honestly, they would probably hear out what the strangers had to say and then decide what to do. A few moments later something was appearing before them, right in the middle of the empty street. It looked at first like some kind of whirl made out of lightning and energy. And then in the center of it formed something that looked like a hole in space itself. Some people around the world with the scientific knowledge, who were following the newscast, recognized it as what a wormhole would theoretically look like. Other watchers recognized the similarities to the interdimensional portal the so-called gateway had been forming, when they had seen the news of the Nameless Ones first invading their world. But while the gateway had required a supercomputer and a lot of complex machinery around it to form, this one had appeared right in empty air. They all realized one thing, however, this was not a hoax or a joke. Then a second later, someone, a person, stepped out of it, closely followed by 2 others and a fourth walking a small distance behind them. The first 3 of the newcomers were at the same time both imposing and terrifying beings. Or in other words, they were just plain scary. The first one was a giant, musculous, blue-skinned figure. He was at least 2.5 meters tall and wearing some kind of golden-colored armor. The next one was nearly as tall as the first visitor and equally, if not more, intimidating. Like the first one, he was clad in some kind of futuristic armor. His skin itself, however, also seemed to be made out of metal. His face also had unnatural thick bluish lips and glowing blood-red eyes. Despite that, however, they were not looking that unusual. Many people with mutation quirks looked not much different than these 2. They could have been human, or nearly. Still, despite that, they had something on them that made nearly everyone who was present's skin crawl. As if something deep inside them was just screaming. These beings are not normal. The third one, however, was something else. Frightening in a completely different way and downright creepy. Even from the first look he seemed like nothing like a strange, sleek and thin-looking, nearly grotesque skeletal being, wearing a dark-colored cloak. But even the skull-like face itself seemed somehow wrong. Like it wasn't really a normal human skull. The forehead was too long, the mouth too wide and with sharp predator-like teeth instead normal ones. In opposite to that, the fourth and last member of the group looked surprisingly completely normal. It was a young woman in maybe her mid to late 20s. Had Izuku and the other, however, stayed in their own reality just a little bit longer, they would have possibly recognized her. It was the same face like the woman in a nun outfit who was leading a group of weirdos wearing priest clothes, who had interfered in the battle between the heroes and the League of Villains. To the astonishment of everyone watching, The second armored being just lifted his hand and the earth before them started to shift and a line of 3 thrones made out of stone formed itself out of the ground. And them, the first 3 of the arrivals, who seemed to be playing some kind of leadership role while the woman seemed more like some assistant or servant, were sitting down on them. People of this planet Earth and this reality, the first figure addressed them, you all, your entire world, is on the brink of destruction. You all don't know what to do anymore. You have given up hope. We come to you with an offer. We come to you in peace. I am Thanos, he introduced himself. This is Lord Ensabanur, and Lord Nergal, he gestured to the other tall armored figure and the robed skeleton-like being. We 3 are lords of the aka Maha, sometimes also called the Dark Order, an old and powerful interdimensional organization, formed by our alliance. We possess power in and over many worlds. We have been watching yours for a while now and became so aware of the peril it is in. He let this word sink in for a few moments, and we offer you protection. Thank you for your generous offer, the Prime Minister replied, more than a bit intimidated. We are very grateful to you for it. He paused for a few moments, as if struggling how to formulate the next question. But if I may ask the question, what do you expect in exchange for your help? What we ask in exchange for it, the second figure, the one called Ensabanur, stated casually, is for you to join our cause, for you and your states to become part of our organization, to join us. With other words, you want us, our entire world, to submit to your rule, one of the ambassadors from the other countries commented. I guess you could call it that, Thanos responded. But let's be honest here, realistically seen you have practically already lost your sovereignty at this point. Your world is about to be overrun by a threat you cannot even slow down. The strongest of the so-called heroes who had formed the backbone of your society is already dead. So what choice is truly left for you? The being sent a stern look to the tross of political representatives. You know your armies cannot save you. Your heroes cannot save you. They have tried. Your weapons cannot. But we can, he stated. And we will, if you pledge yourself to us, he said matter-of-factly. If you prove yourself worthy. Worthy? The Prime Minister questioned. One of the core principles of our alliance is that all life needs to prove itself worthy to survive, the being named Ensabanur explained. A principle that we will make sure to teach you all. Of course, if you were to be part of us, certain change needed to be made in your society. What kind of changes? Someone, one of the visiting ambassadors, questioned insecurely. We are glad you ask, Ensabanur replied. There are indeed many misdirections in your social and political systems, especially here in Japan. Your nearly complete fixation on inherited powers and what you call quirks, over any other qualities like intelligence, knowledge and skills. Your technological development had actually been stagnating for nearly a century. We plan to change that. Izuku admitted so far he nearly completely agreed with all what was said. Maybe, just maybe, these guys weren't so bad after all. He thought for a short moment. She should quickly realize how completely wrong he was. And there is your nearly complete dependence of heroes, Ensabanur brought up. Heroes who have already failed to protect you. While your people seem to value your genetic powers over anything else, the vast majority of your citizens is actually being heavily discouraged from using or even properly train them, severely wasting your potential. To clean your society of these flaws, however, of this weakness, Thanos stated, it should be the best to remove as many of the individuals that carry these flaws as possible, he announced. In this case I would say, about 10, let us say 5% of your population. These words were followed by a few moments of stunned, horrified and disbelieving silence. The statement had sounded so casual, so normal. As if this creature had not just declared his intention to commit genocide. Lord Nergal. Thanos turned around to the cloaked skeletal being sitting next to him. Are you willing to take the responsibility for this world in the name of us all? The death-like being was looking around in silence for a short moment, from his compatriots to the native population and back. I will accept this task, he finally answered. His voice sounded strange, raspy and distorted, nearly as if it was not even his own, and making him seem even less human than his allies were. Enough. Endeavor called out. This is madness, and I will put an end to this lunacy right now. He activated his quirk and his body was being covered in flames. He took a step forward, ready to stop these madmen. His two comrades followed his example. But before they could actually do anything, from one moment to the other, Endeavor suddenly stopped and fell down with a loud cry. It was as if some kind of invisible force had thrown him down. They saw to their shock that both of his legs seemed to be broken. Telekinesis, Izuku whispered in the here and now. But which one of them was it? He realized that the cloaked skeletal being had been looking straight at Endeavor. The other two pro-heroes stopped abruptly in their movements. Not just because of the shock of seeing the number 2 hero going down like this, it was as if they had run into an invisible wall. They were in need of a moment to recover, and that was their undoing. The two other interdimensional beings moved in a split second, with the one calling himself Ensabanur appearing in front of Edgeshot with an raised arm. An arm that suddenly stretched out and became inhumanly long, while sending a hard punch in the hero's gut. Edgeshot tried to use his quirk to shift the form of his body, but before he could his opponent opened his fist and fired some kind of energy blast that tore through the hero's chest and let him falling dead to the ground. At the same time Thanos had been grabbing Best Jeanist at the throat with one of his oversized hands. The hero used his quirk to form strings that rang themselves around his arm, trying to shackle him. But he just ripped them apart, and with one movement broke the hero's neck. Everyone around was staring in shock at the scene, where 3 top 10 heroes had just been taken down in seconds. And so were Izuku and the other people just watching the recording in the present. But that was not even the end. The still living and conscious Endeavor was suddenly lifted up by an invisible force and then placed in a kneeling position right before one of the 3 makeshift thrones at the middle of the street. And Thanos sat down on it and, much to the shock of everyone, laid down his oversized boots right on his back, treating him like a piece of furniture. "Well, it seems you have finally found your true purpose," the woman who came with them, who had been dutifully standing aside of the thrones the whole time, commented. "Trust me. There are people meant to become number 1 hero and there are ones meant to serve as a footchair." She chuckled darkly. To make it worse, she said it loud enough to be caught by the cameras, so that her sadistic statement would be heard by millions of people. This world's Endeavor let out a terrible scream of both pain and humiliation. "You all have heard our proposal," Thanos stated. His feet still rested on Endeavor's back in a twisted show of triumph. "It is a more than generous offer, 5% of your population, and a new government formed by our designs," he repeated. "That or we will just leave and you and your planet will face complete destruction. It is your choice." With these words he stood up again, raised his left foot right over Endeavor's head and stomped down right on top of. The recording had ended. Aizawa too had mercifully decided to cut it off right before the final moments. But they all could all too easily imagine what had been about to happen. The room was filled with silence. They all could not really believe what they had seen. Endeavor for his part was white like a sheet. The greatest irony was that the offer was in a way truly generous, Aizawa too stated with some cynic sarcasm. As we later heard, this being used to have the habit of taking 50% of the population. But our world was already decimated from the nameless ones. So it possibly didn't even make a difference. With this begging a genocide, this one actually carried out by our own people, in form of regular raids and so-called sacrifices. You have seen the leftovers of one just when Himiko had found you. They took control of all countries not yet infected by the nameless ones. They offered most political leaders a chance to step down peacefully. Who refused was being murdered. They begged to indoctrinate our young people into their murderous philosophies. An entire generatio was from the point they could walk, being turned into cold-blooded killers. As Uwa was being transformed from a school for heroes into a training center for government agents and inquisitors, most of the teachers deserted, myself included. I had met Stain here a short time later, who had started a movement to resist these tyrants. Since then we have been working together and recruited more followers. So what do you plan to take them down for good? Endeavor finally asked. It seemed he was getting his senses back from the shock of seeing the last video and his other selves' shameful demise. Their 3 hosts exchanged an uneasy look. We are concentration on saving and protecting as many people as we can, Aizawa too said. But actually defeating them, we don't think that is something we can truly do. Not now. Maybe not ever, he admitted. So you don't actually fight to win, Bakugo remarked. You guys are nothing but a bunch of losers. Hey asshole, Himiko called out. In case you haven't noticed, this isn't like in your world, where loudmouths like you can loudly claim that heroes always win, but then run and hide behind All Might's skirt whenever they're in over their heads. What did you say, bitch? Bakugo shouted and tried to charge up a few explosions. But Aizawa 02 just looked at him and deactivated his quirk. Enough, he said sternly. Don't forget you are our guests. Right now it is you we are protecting. He is right, Bakugo, Shoto spoke up. We were lost out there and had no idea what to do. And even then, All Might is dead so is my father and who knows how many other heroes. Do you truly think they, or we, could do better when they failed? Bakugo gritted his teeth. Damn it, he said. You don't know what we are dealing with, Stain told them. You have only seen a few short glimpses. Like they said, the Dark Order is an alliance of interdimensional warlords and malevolent superbeings, megavillains, as you would probably call them. They all make All for One look like a child in comparison. Or better said, that is what they had been centuries ago. They however became something worse. Their immortal leaders managed to evolve themselves and their powers to a point where they nearly surpass any imagination. What you have just seen is just a small fraction of it, and they had wiped out 3 of the strongest heroes in seconds. They became, for the lack of better words, gods of darkness and destruction. But they are not without rivals. We know that, aside from the nameless ones, they're at war with at least one other similar force. One that seemed more benevolent. But that was also one of the reasons they were interested in our world in the first place. To use us in their war, as recourses and cannon fodder. And even if we by some wonder managed to defeat them and force them off our world, we would still have the nameless ones to deal with, who are just as dangerous. So Bakugo. That was your name, wasn't it? If you have any brilliant ideas how to deal with all this, tell us. Believe me, we all would gladly hear it, Stain commented sarcastically. Bakugo said nothing. What was there left to say about that? So why have these enemies of them not done anything about all this shit if they are so benevolent? He asked instead. Who said they didn't? Aizawa 02 stated. We had heard stories from our spies in All for One's ranks that they had made some attempt to change the past, before the nameless ones had first invaded. But as it seems they had just succeeded in creating a new alternate timeline. Yours possibly. It might be the reason why the world like you know it even exists. Are you saying that this is how our world should actually look like? Momo asked horrified. We cannot really say for sure, he admitted. But it is very likely, by all we know. It is also the main reason you are not in a cell right now, given that some of you are nearly exact copies of some of our enemies. He was looking straight at Izuku as he said that. But given that he know that such an otherworld exists, and since Himiko here vouches for you. Exactly, Himiko commented smiling. Talking about All for One, Aizawa 01 said, you HVE mentioned him twice now. What happened to him in your world? He was one of the people who had taken advantage of the new situation, Stain replied. He had offered to join our new masters and was named governor of East Asia. That means in this case Japan, China and Korea. That made him once again one of the most powerful individuals on the planet. He also had a young protege, Shigaraki Tamura, Aizawa 01 stated. No, Midoriya Izuku. Dekiru, Izuku said quietly. Yes, it is true that he had his eyes on Shirazaki for an entire while, but then, something else had happened to him, Aizawa 02 explained. And Dekiru? How did he become like this? Izuku questioned. It had started a long time ago. Dekiru, he had been devastated when he heard what happened with All Might, and even more than the rest of the hero society fell. But then, the new government began with their propaganda and he started to believe them, Himiko told them. There had been another student in our class named Bakugo Katsuki. He had a powerful quirk and knew how to use it. Everyone thought he would have a great career ahead and Izuku would be sidelined. They were wrong. Dekiru told us that they used to be friends when they were children. But ever since he developed a quirk and Dekiru not, he treated him like crap. But then he drew the attention of Governor All for One because of his talent in quirk analyses. As it turned both he and the Dark Order valued this kind of genius far more than the ability to cause explosions with your hands, she commented with a side glance to Bakugo. All for One granted him a quirk on his own, and then, someday when we were at high school, he presented Bakugo's severed head to the entire class. This caused another shock to all of them. It reminded them once more just how messed up and twisted this world was. Izuku could barely believe what he was hearing, and nobody had done something about this. Aizawa asked, unbelieving. Well, the teacher wanted to have him expelled, but All for One interfered, and instead he was praised for his initiative, newfound power, and his showing an example for people who relied too much on their quirk. Bakugo's mother had publicly protested, but she had then been invited to an audience with All for One and never been seen again. Izuku and Bakugo now both looked ready to throw up. With Dekiru, the rest of us came under All for One's attention as well. Me, Ochako and Tsuyu. We were close back then. Is that the reason you are so different from the Toga we know? Izuku asked. I mean, you are. She looked at them a bit uneasy. Not a complete psycho, Ribbit, Tsuyu finished bluntly. Hey, Toga called out. Subtle as a sledgehammer, just like the Tsu I know, Himiko replied. But I am not that different. To be honest, if I look at you too, I feel the urge to cut you, just a little bit, to draw and drink your blood, and then do other things with you. While she said this, she showed a grin that was worthy of their Toga. To answer your question, she stated. She looked at her other self. So my guess is that you became a villain because of your urges about blood and society, your family and all people around you constantly telling you to suppress these urges. But that only made them stronger. And so you started to attack people for their blood and to break out from what society tried to force you to be. And then you started to kill. Tell me if I am close to the truth. A bit simplified, Toga replied, but all in all you are not wrong. You see, Himiko continued, my bloodlust had always been satisfied. At our school we actually learned to kill. Since we had entered high school, me, Dekiru and the others had been taking part in raids. I had killed my first person by myself before I ended my first year, and we had a state license for it. So what changed? Tsuyu asked after a light gulp. I am not quite sure myself, Himiko admitted. But someday I just took a look at myself and the others and realized, what we were doing had nothing to do with having a freer and easier life anymore, with following my own nature. Or even with simply satisfying my bloodlust. We were just monsters, being made and thought and taking orders from even greater monsters. And I decided I could just not do this anymore. I love blood, I always have and always will, but not that of millions. All for One died then about a year ago, Aizawa too stated, and Dekiru, despite his youth, became his successor. Oh okay, Izuku said, I think I have heard enough. For the moment he not wanted to hear any more about the monsters that his other self and his friends had become. Midoriya is right, Aizawa stated. Could we have some time for ourselves? Of course, his double replied. Should we have told them the whole truth? Himiko, aka Toga-02, asked Stain as soon as their visitors had left the room. No, I think they have already enough to deal with right now, Aizawa-02 stated. Stain nodded. Can you imagine how they would react if they heard this too now? He said. They are all already clearly on the edge, or already more than that, Aizawa-02 pointed out. Do you think with all they had just to take in this short time, it could be any different? They're barely dealing with the situation as it is. How do you think they would take this to on top of it right now? Himiko sighed in understanding. Not too well, I guess, she admitted. They were right. They themselves had been shocked to the core when they first found out years ago. Their entire worldview had been turned upside down. When they found out that the Dark Order was responsible for the appearance of the quirks, that they had manipulated the collective genome of the entire planet, that their entire world was actually nothing more than a giant field experiment and a resource for beings with superhuman powers, and that maybe the only reason they had even decided to help them, for the moment, might be to protect their own investment. Izuku had just been going outside. They had told him to be careful and not to walk way too far from the hideout, but he just needed some time by himself. He was just taking a small round around the building. He knew the others were most likely doing something similar. Bakugo had been the first to walk off. He had been clearly shaken by the fact that Izuku had actually killed his counterpart in this world. He was trying to hide it, but he knew him all too well. As Izuku was halfway around the house, He saw someone sitting all by herself. It was Suyu. "Sue," he said to her. "Are you all right?" He realized how stupid the question was. "Do you think Ochako is okay? Our Ochako?" she asked him. "She was in that room with us and—" "I am sure she is. She had managed to save herself from falling and should be with the others back home," he said. "It is we who are in trouble," he could not help himself adding. "I know," she just answered. For a few moments both of them said nothing. "Izuku, I am scared," she finally said. "I want to be a hero, just like you do. But this has no longer anything to do with being a hero. This is just about getting away alive. Sue. We cannot even do anything to help these people. Nothing at all," she said loud. "And I am afraid to go there. I don't want to face the monsters that had killed All Might. I just want to be back home. I wish we had never come here." Izuku sat down next to her and laid his arm around her. "So do I, Sue," he said. "We all feel that way. It is just that not all of us are willing to admit it." Not far away, at the other side of the building, Bakugo had quite similar thoughts. For a few minutes now he was walking angrily in circles around the small yard. Finally he could not take it anymore and threw a hard punch on the wall of the neighboring, long-abandoned, building. To everyone's luck he was aware enough not to use his quirk. The last thing they needed was to draw the attention of a patrol. He clenched his teeth. He felt pain in his hand. But that was not the source of his anguish. Finally he just sat down on the ground and let out a bitter laugh. Being number one, he thought sarcastically to himself. A hero always wins the day with a smile on his face. What a joke. Here was no winning, no chance, no hope. He had truly been nothing but a spoiled, arrogant little shit all their years, he silently told himself. In a small room, under guard, the two captured villains were staring wordlessly at each other. They too, like everyone else, were slowly beginning to take in the full scope of what they had seen and heard. Dobby just felt empty. He had always thought the day he would see Endeavor broken and destroyed would be the best in his life, but this? Next to him, Toga had similar thoughts. She could just not get the words of her other self out of her head. "I love blood, I always have and always will, but not that of millions." She knew that Shigaraki's declared goal was to "destroy everything," but he only meant the current society, the heroes and all the people who were too stuck in their ways. It was not as if the world he will create would turn out like this one, she told herself. Or would it? Of course not. Right? Far away, inside the fortress that had once been Ua Academy, a young man who looked like an exact mirror image of Midoriya Izuku. The most visible difference was that Dekiru's hair was straight and slightly darker than the unruly green mess of his younger counterpart. He was in the middle of a conversation with another being, the only one who still truly outranked him on this planet. The being calling himself Nergal was still wearing the same black. He looked like a completely different creature, because he was, at least physically. The face looking back at him from beneath the hood belonged to nobody else than Shigaraki Tamura, the man who would have in another life been his arch-enemy. But not here. The person who he once had been was gone. The face nearly looked the same, only that it was even more damaged and rotten than it had already been as a side effect of his decaying quirk. He was truly looking like a walking corpse, and in a sense he was. Only the red inhuman glow that showed in his eyes regularly spoke of the alien intelligence now controlling the body. Even he didn't know exactly the being named Nergal's reasoning for choosing him as his new host body. But he could guess that it had to do with Tamura's quirk. "Well, it seems we are having visitors," Nergal, Tamura stated, "and under them was a double of you as well. How interesting." His voice sounded much more human, now with Shigaraki as his new vessel. "You don't seem too surprised," Dekiru commented. "I have already told you about the attempt of our enemies to change the past, haven't I?" "Yes you did," Dekiru admitted. "So our visitors are from the nice other world? I am curious if my other self has realized my old dream of becoming a hero, and if his stay here will teach him how pointless it was." "Well, maybe you will have the chance to teach him this lesson in person," Nergal stated. "Leave me now. I have things to take care of, and I think so do you." Midoriya Izuku, also known as Dekiru, was returning to his personal office. In the middle of the room, A few meters from his desk was a large table. Standing around it were a young woman with brown hair in a skin-tight bodysuit, Uraraka Ochako, and on the other side a younger girl with white hair and a horn on her forehead. And lying on and bound to the table was a very short-looking young man with purple hair in the form of strange round balls. Arg! The boy let out a horrible scream as Uraraka had just cut off his finger. Now Mineta-kun. You know we could continue with this the entire night, Uraraka said to him sweetly. She gave a nod to a visibly reluctant Eri, who then used her quirk to reverse the damage. She hated doing this, but she knew she had not much choice. Why don't you just tell us what you know about your friends and this here could be over, Uraraka told him. Why you have killed my entire family? Why should I tell you anything? The boy managed to snap back. Now Mineta-kun, Dekiru said, joining the conversation, you say we killed your family as if it is a bad thing. Isn't the truth that your family never accepted you? They were ashamed of you. They thought you with your ed tendencies were a disgrace. We have done you a favor. You, Mineta called out. Nah Mineta, don't you know that this is not a smart way to talk to the people who are having the knife? Uraraka stated. And you know what happens here to people who are not smart enough, right? That is enough Ochako. We are trying to convince our friend here after all, not kill him, Dekiru said. You know, you were lucky. There is another group out there we want information about. One that just seemed to have made contact with the resistance. You could help us against both. And we have much time to convince you. Back in the normal universe. The battle had suddenly been taking a strange turn, as a bizarre group of people in priest-like clothes had suddenly appeared and joined the fight. They were however not joining one side or the other, but attacking both of them simultaneously. The ones who were carrying handguns and automatic weapons had nearly instantly after their arrival opened fire on everyone around, heroes, villains, police and simply guardsmen alike. What a bunch of freaks, several members of both heroes and villains' side thought secretly nearly simultaneously. These strangers however, despite the first impression they made, were not simple thugs. Even the pros had to admit, they were good, even if they were clearly insane. One of the newcomers seemed to have a quirk that allowed him to form some kind of barrier around himself and others. That allowed him to stop any bullets that were fired at them in return whenever he activated it. In addition to that, the heroes realized quickly that all of this bizarre group was wearing body armor beneath their priest clothes. The only one who didn't even seem to need it was the monstrosity calling himself Claw. Bullets were literally just bouncing off from his black, hardened and seemingly alive, outer skin. The creature literally tore through their lines, ripping through the flesh of guards, policemen and even heroes with his sharp claws. The woman in the nun outfit calling herself Sister Katsuragi, who seemed to be the leader, however was just walking forward across the lines. One of her compatriots, a young man around 20 dressed like an actual priest, used his quirk to form some kind of transparent energy barrier around her, that protected her from incoming projectiles. And at the same time she was using her own quirk. She lifted her hand and pointed at a couple of people. The first two were WWO police officers, one male one female. For a moment, nothing happened. Then however, their flesh seemed starting to boil. Their skin was breaking open at some places and finally they fell down with horrible screams. The entire horrible display had just taken a few seconds, but it was enough to shock everyone. The next was one of Twice clones, who met a similar terrifying fate. Like the rest of her group, she was attacking both sides at once. What kind of a quirk is that? Mirio called out horrified. I think it must be some kind of microwaves, Edgeshot exclaimed. At the same time he formed his arm into a long lance with a short spike that he threw against her. But the barrier that the woman's comrade had created blocked his attack, just like it blocked a rain of bullets that was coming from all sides. It was a dangerous combination. The barrier was stopping bullets and long-range attacks, but everyone who came closer risked to fall victim to the woman's microwave quirk. Inside the building the remaining heroes had by now found out about the disappearance of Endeavor, Aizawa and the group of students. They had found Uraraka and after she woke up, heard what had happened from her, at least as far as she could tell them. But it was enough for the beginning. They are gone, she told them, completely desperate and with tears in her eyes. The machine, she said. They understood. The gateway had been opened and the others had somehow fallen through it. 2 villains, Toga and Dabi, as well. It could hardly be any worse. 2 heroes, one of them the number 1, and 5 students, simply gone. There was no telling where, if at all, they could have been sent to. But they could not even deal with this disaster right now. The building was under attack. They had to get out and help the others. The monster called Claw had meanwhile continued his rampage. He had at this point already injured several heroes, guards and villains and killed 2 policemen. Best Jeanist was using his quirk trying to shackle him and hold him back, while Gand Orca was charging at him directly, trying to subdue him hand to hand. Iida was using the chance to use his super speed to jump and kick the monster into the face while he was still struggling with Orca, but it didn't show much effect. More UA students were now joining the fight, following the heroes who had so far been inside the building. Under them were also Tokiyami Fumikage, the young man with a head resembling a raven bird, whose quirk manifested itself as a being called Dark Shadow that lived inside his body, and Juru Kyoka, who had the ability to create powerful sonic waves. Juru, a girl in punk rock clothes with short black hair and ear lopes that resembled earphone jacks, used her quirk, along with a few other hero students, on a trio of villains close to them. Coincidentally, however, Claw was also in reach of her quirk, and the reaction was something nobody would have expected. In the moment Juru unleashed her sonic waves, Claw froze in his movement, moved his hand up holding his head, and they suddenly heard a loud shrill shriek coming from the creature. And not from the man himself. No, it seemed to come from his seemingly living exosuit. Could it be? Juru was now concentrating her quirk on Claw fully, and the shrieks were getting even louder, and the living black substance even seemed to partly dissolve around the human man's body. Gang Orca, however, of course used this chance to land a few vicious hits on his distracted opponent. At the same time, Tokiyami was moving Dark Shadow to help Edgeshot and a number of policemen with rifles to attack the barrier between the heroes and Sister Katsuragi and her partner. Being a psychic manifestation, Dark Shadow was not much affected by her microwaves. And going by the distressed expression of the barrier's creator and the fact that they were drawing back fast, it was clear that said barrier was weakening quickly. Around 5 minutes later, it was already over. Shigaraki, this here has no sense anymore, Kurogiri had called out to him. Let us retreat. Yes, you are right. Get us out of here, he said. The members of the League fell back and gathered either around him or around the 2 Kurogiri clones that twice had created, and they teleported them away. The mysterious strangers calling themselves the Church of Chaos followed their example a short time later, seeing that even more heroes and Peloche forces were arriving and they were clearly outmatched, and retreated as well. In opposite to the League, they didn't teleport, since they had no member with such an ability, and also because their leaders didn't bother to give them technology like that. Instead, their group quickly entered a black van and raced away with full speed. The heroes were moving to follow and try to capture them, but 1 moment later the vehicle seemed to just disappear. They did not have a member who could teleport, but they did have one who could turn things invisible. They had no way to know in what direction the disappeared car was driving now. Whoever these guys were, a few of the heroes thought, they were much more dangerous as it first seemed. Inside the fleeing vehicle, the members of the group were all but happy. Instead, most of them looked pretty devastated. Especially their leader. We have failed, she said grimly. Headquarter of the League of Villains. Well, in a way that worked perfectly, didn't it, Kurogiri? Shigaraki said. I guess that matter is debatable, the teleporter replied. It is not as if we ever truly intended to take over that building, right? Shigaraki commented. We were just to stage a little attack and make this heroes believe that there is an actual threat. That was part of our agreement with Jones. So that he can gain more public attention for his little project. And that he could manipulate the heroes to place better protection for his little project from this group of freaks he believed were truly after it. Who had believed that they would truly show up, and can gain public attention for it on top of that. He laughed. You didn't think that a bit suspicious? Kurogiri asked. Of course it is. That is the reason I have sent Toga and Dabi in to take a look at things and if possible get more data about Jones' new technology by themselves. But the problem is they had not reported back. The other world Izuku was not sure how long they had been asleep. For a moment he had been a bit shocked as he woke up at an unknown place with a body next to him, who he nearly instantly recognized as a girl and a second later as his classmate Tsuyu. Then the memories hit him about what had happened yesterday, all what had happened. They had, as it seemed, actually fallen asleep out here. Tsuyu stirred as well after a few moments of him moving. They were lucky that it was not too cold outside. Having the characteristics of a frog, she could have gotten into hibernation otherwise. "Sue," he said to her. "Izuku," she responded, correcting herself. "We have fallen asleep." "Yes, I know. Let us go back inside," she said. Back inside the base, not much had changed. Bakugo, Todoroki and Momo were sitting together at one of the tables in the room that served as something like the common room of the resistance hideout. "Hey," Izuku greeted them. "You are back," Todoroki said. "You two were out there together for a long time," Momo stated. "Have you been doing anything? Taking a closer look at the town or?" "If you want to know, we have been together. Sleeping, Ribbit," Tsuyu replied. The others were all looking at them shocked. Even Bakugo was looking up in surprise. Izuku was only staring at Tsuyu with an open mouth. It is nice that you two came together, but don't you think that it is a bit dangerous out there, with the patrols of this psychos running around? Could you not at least take a room?" Momo pointed out. "By the way, Izuku, I had the impression that you were interested in Uraraka?" Izuku and Tsuyu were now looking at each other in a short but intense look. "You. Uraraki," he stammered. "Sue. What are you saying?" Izuku hissed at her. He was now deep red in the face. "Sorry, I meant we had been sitting together and we had then both fallen asleep," Tsuyu corrected. The others visibly relaxed. "Oh," Momo just said. "Not that I care either way what you and Frog Girl are doing together," Bakugo commented. "Where are Aizawa-sensei and Endeavor, Ribbit?" Tsuyu asked them. "They are sitting together in a meeting with Stain and the other leaders of this resistance," Momo told them, "to discuss what to do from now on." "I see," Izuku said. He caught himself looking at Tsuyu for a few more moments, before he returned to concentrate completely on the topic ahead. Bakugo was now just sitting there with a frown on his face. "I just hope that we will do anything quickly," he said. "It drives me crazy to just sit around here." "The original gateway is in America, as they told us," Todoroki reminded them. "And by what they said the continent is now completely occupied by these monsters." "Yes," Bakugo said grimly. "If these creatures have taken down All Might, all of the heroes and the military in America and destroyed the entire continent, what chance do you think we have?" Momo stated. "What else do you suggest? Staying here, Ribbit?" Tsuyu asked. "Here?" Izuku said quietly. "In this nightmarish world?" He remembered all they had seen the last couple of days. If this world was not his idea of hell, it came at least pretty close. "No," Momo replied horrified. "Never." Bakugo suddenly jumped up from his chair. "Yes," he called out, "maybe there is another way." "What do you mean?" Todoroki asked. "Think about it. Have they not said that these freaks we have seen in the recording come from another dimension or something?" Bakugo said. "So they must have a way to travel between them as well. I say we go after these bastards and beat it out of them." The others had to say they were impressed by Bakugo's realization. There was just one problem. "You mean the guys who slaughtered my father and two other top 10 heroes in seconds?" Todoroki asked skeptically. "Oh, you think going through a continent full of monsters is better?" Bakugo responded. "Besides, their underlings here would not be that strong. So we could just catch a few of them and ask them." Kachan, just because their leaders can travel between worlds somehow doesn't automatically mean that all their underlings can do it, Izuku said. Bakugo frowned, but didn't say something in return. "He is right. It is likely that only the people on top know something about it," Momo mentioned. "Really? I have a good idea who we should ask," Bakugo stated. "And who?" Todoroki questioned. "Deku's bastard of a double," he answered grinning. "What?" Izuku called out. "But isn't he the governor of Japan or something, Ribbit?" Tsuyu commented. "It would be difficult to come even close to someone like him." "Yes, of course. So if anyone would know about it, then he, right? And besides, I would like nothing more than to get my hands on this asshole for what he did to me and my mother in this world. We should discuss this with Father and Aizawa-sensei and the others when they are finished with their talk, Todoroki offered. The resistance knows the situation in this world much better than us after all. Are you just suggesting this because you want revenge for what has happened for your other self and your mother, Ribbit? Tsuyu asked Bakugo. Or are you actually believing this? Dekiru might know anything that can get us home. Her friends noticed the short pause she made before saying Izuku's double's name, as if she wanted to state that she didn't consider them the same person. Bakugo stared at her wordlessly for a moment. 2 days ago he would have been shouting at her in this situation and probably challenging her to a fight. Now he was just looking silently and grimaced in anger. Both, he finally admitted. I truly want to bring that shithead down. But I also believe that he might actually know something that might help us get back home. After another 10 minutes, the 2 adult heroes returned, together with the leading members of the resistance group. The 5 hero students told what they had discussed to them, including Bakugo's idea. Well, I fear there is a little problem with your plan, Stain said. While the beings who be out the Dark Order here claimed to be from another dimension and probably were, we simply don't know if they gave such technology to their followers here or not. For all we know, we could capture Dekiru and they have never told him about the way they move between the dimensions. So you are not sure, Endeavor stated. Yeah, not that capturing Dekiru would not be a great thing for us in itself, Stain commented. But Bakugo is not wrong, Aizawa offered. As hard as it would be getting to this Dekiru, given his position, it would still be less dangerous than walking on a continent full of monsters and undead. Yes, but it might also be for nothing, Endeavor countered. I might have a suggestion, Stain stated. We have a few contacts, that means spies, under Dekiru's followers. Simply said, we can prepare for a mission to the former USA and make sure that Dekiru will know about it. We will let Kurugiri transport us to one of the islands before the American coast and there we will be waiting for him. They remembered that the teleporter who acted as something of the adjutant of the League of Villains was a member of the resistance here. You mean want to use this entire situation as a bait? Aizawa asked surprised. I know it sounds crazy, Stain admitted, but if they knew we are trying to find the original gateway, the chance is very good that Dekiru will personally come to deal with it. And that is a good thing? Izuku asked nervously. To be honest, we have been considering an attempt to assassinate or capture him for a while now. But getting to him here in Japan, surrounded by soldiers and followers, is very difficult. Assassinate, Izuku and the others registered the word. It was not just about trying to capture and imprisoning, they were aiming to kill him. Endeavor and Aizawa did as well, but far more unemotional. In opposite to the kids, they had already fully registered how different the situation was here. If Dekiru decides to follow us, however, he will for sure take his personal hunting squad for this mission, Stain continued. And that is the same group we managed to infiltrate. Then we have a much better chance. And if he don't? Endeavor asked. Stain shrugged. Then we will just continue with the original idea and find the exact location of the original gateway and get you guys, Stain replied. And hopefully, he thought secretly, a few of their own people as well. The truth was, they were not just doing this for their guests. The gateway was the perfect chance for them to at least get a few of their own people away from this horrible world. By helping them, they were helping themselves. Like he had already openly admitted, they were not heroes and not even villains, not anymore. But what about Toga and that villain Dabi? Momo asked. We cannot just leave them here, Izuku said. Endeavor sighed. They are villains. But they are villains from our world and society, he stated. It is our duty to bring them to justice. Not to simply abandon them here. Of course there was another reason he didn't want to leave them, especially Dabi, behind. Before they left the room, Izuku turned to Stain. It was kind of unsettling, he admitted, looking in that face and seeing an ally. Is my counterpart really that dangerous? He asked. I mean, all this just to take him out? Stain looked at him with his arms crossed. He was right now not wearing his typical mask, which he had in this world like in the other, but his face was still nearly unreadable. You are a hero student in your world, right? And All Might's successor? Yes, Izuku answered. But your counterpart here is very different. He is 2 years older than you, and since All for One's death he is the governor of Japan for the Dark Order and a mass murderer. He is the head of their armies and their death squads and personally responsible for the death of at least hundred thousands, maybe millions. Izuku gulped. But there is also another reason why he is such an important target. You have already been told that All for One had transferred a quirk to him, but you don't know what quirk it was. 15 minutes later, the prison cells Izuku and Tsuyu, Endeavor and Aizawa and the resistance members Stain and Toga Himiko were not standing in front of the cells where their worlds Toga and Dabi were being held. Ah, Izuku. I am happy that you have come to visit me, and you too, Su. Toga greeted them. Oh, and the others have come too. They are not just here to talk to you, Himiko stated. Oh, you are me, Toga responded. Su is my friend and Izuku is the man I love. So of course I am happy to see them. Nobody even bothered to contradict her in anything she said. Himiko, however, could barely suppress a frown. She remembered her own feelings for Izuku, no Dekiru, before she fully realized what kind of monster he really was, and what kind of monster she was becoming under him. Enough, you two. Endeavor called out. We're here to talk to you about something else. But if you are not interested, we can also leave you here. Oh really? Dabi questioned. I would really doubt that. He knew he was bluffing. Like Endeavor said, we're trying to find a way back home, Aizawa stated. And we want to take you two with us, if you are willing to cooperate. Dabi and Toga exchanged a short look. The Japanese sector government building, formerly Uaestemi, 2 days later. Dekiru was just returning from his visit to the Quirk engineering facility a few miles outside of the town. Despite the name, it was in fact to a great part a breeding facility. A large number of test subjects were there being held in an artificial coma. They were serving as genetic donors for the cloning equipment that their masters from outside this dimension had provided them with. Beside that, some of the female subjects were also sometimes used for artificial insemination. All that for the purpose to create more powerful quirk users for their new society. Officially, he had been there simply for an inspection. In truth, however, his visit had another purpose. He had finally been able to pick up the last present All for One had left for him. He would have done it much earlier, but this was the best way to keep the Overlord from finding out about it. Dekiru would soon report to him again. No matter how many times he saw him, the sight of the decayed face of his old rival Shigaraki Tamura whenever he met the creature made him sick. Not that he would have hesitated to kill Shigaraki himself if he had to, but he knew what happened to him was worse than death. He knew something of him, whatever was left of the real Shigaraki, still lived inside the abomination. All for One had been furious as the Overlord had pressed him into handing Tamura over to him as his new host body. But this anger had quickly been overshadowed by fear. Because All for One had figured out the true reason why the Overlord, the creature called Nergal, had healed his injuries and restored his body and even augmented his powers. The alien being already desired a new human host after Tamura would be used up, All for One himself. But ultimately the Overlord had tricked himself. The improvements he had made on Dekiru's predecessor's DNA had allowed him to give Dekiru a quirk he normally couldn't, his own. Before he had killed All for One on his own request, he had told him this, and also that he had placed the quirks that had given him his longevity and physical regeneration into 2 of the unconscious test subjects in the facility Dekiru had just visited. Sadly, however, what was transferred to him was just a foe's base quirk and not the many other powers he had absorbed. So Dekiru needed to start collect quirks all over again. Dekiru had used the opportunity to reabsorb the 2 quirks and a few others he found useful, and then shut down the life support systems and quietly disposed of the test subjects in question. He was more powerful than ever before, but it was still not enough. But for now he had a few other things to deal with. The Japanese sector government building, formerly UA Academy. Dekiru had returned from a "routine inspection" at the local hospital center, quirk breeding facility. Or at least it seemed so. What nobody was aware, during this short visit he had actually absorbed a half-dozen quirks from different unconscious inmates. Just like nobody was aware that he actually possessed the quirk All for One. And if everything would work out, nobody would know about it, not until he was strong enough. But that would still take some time. Depending on how powerful the quirks were he could absorb, probably a few more years. But right now Deku pushed such thoughts out of his mind. The Overlord had summoned him for a personal report. It was nothing unusual, he was doing this regularly. Always calling him and questioning him about the details of his activities. While he himself was sitting back in his base, barely doing anything and leaving it to Deku and the other regional governors to actually run their territories. Only plotting his own twisted sinister schemes among his own subordinates and communicating from time to time with his partners from another dimension and demanding reports. And then letting Deku take care of the actual work by himself anyway. Overlord? He thought. In his eyes this creature was nothing but a monstrous parasite. In the truest sense of the word. Not even the body he used was his own. Every time Deku saw into the deformed face that had once belonged to his rival Tamura Shigaraki, with this abomination now controlling his body, he had to fight down his resentment and disgust. Secretly Deku sometimes he liked to think that even the other lords had only given him this position because secretly they could not stand him either and wanted an excuse to get him away from them. Sometimes he even believed that could actually be true. Still, he had to remind himself not to underestimate the creature. Whatever else Nergal was, he was extremely dangerous. Taking him lightly would mean certain doom. Deku also reminded himself that his and his compatriots' combined powers were the only thing keeping the Nameless Ones in check. So even if he had a chance, getting rid of him without actually being able to replace him would most likely mean the end of their world. What he needed was patience, and more power, far more. Ah, Deku, the Overlord greeting him as he stepped into the rooms of Nergal's personal refugium. It was an entire section of the former UA building that had been shut off from the rest and declared to Lord Nergal's exclusive use. Everyone except Deku himself, who were found setting foot in that part of the building without explicit permission, could be expected to be killed on the spot. Tell me, how are your latest activities been going on? The Overlord asked him. His tone, ignoring the nearly dead, raspy distorted voice, nearly like a zombie, which was not that far from the truth, seemed to be casual, nearly amused. He was standing before him in his usual black cloak, the back turned to him. As Deku had expected, their meeting played out like usually. He was asking him various questions about what had happened and what he had done, no doubt using his mental powers to probe his mind at the same time to confirm his words. He could only thank All for One for providing him with the means to resist such abilities, at least to some level. While Deku responded by giving him true but in a few cases vague answers. At least when it came to the parts of his activities that were not truly in the Overlord favor, hiding his deeper and true intentions from him. Like the fact that All for One had transferred his quirk to him before he died. The Overlord, like so many others, had been told that he had simply received his old friend, Kazuki's quirk, and he seemed to believe it. Deku had made sure to always only use Katsuki's explosion quirk in public. Or at least made sure that there were no living witnesses left behind otherwise. And of course the fact that he was regularly absorbing new powers. Powers that he eventually planned to use against him. In the parts where it came to actual official business, however, he was on the other hand completely open. Like the fact that they seemed to have a leak in their organization lately. Someone who was sending information to the resistance. And he allowed himself to show his true anger about the situation, especially since he now knew who was responsible. Only when it came to his more treacherous activities, he was actually actively deceiving Nergal. Is that so? The creature said after he had given him his report about both Mineta and the other spy, who was working against them. Then take care of it. Good work, Deku. Like usual, he didn't sound like he actually cared in one way or the other. Thank you, sir, he answered and turned around to leave the room. He imagined a smile on the wretched creature's face as he walked away. It sometimes felt like a not-ending vicious circle, like he and the Overlord were playing a deadly game with each other. Still, all too often Deku was having doubts about who was playing with who. Did Nergal actually suspect what he was planning? Was it possible that he was just somehow testing him? Who could tell what a creature like that was truly thinking? Deku forced himself to push his thoughts aside. There was no point in doubting everything he did and let his fears running amok. It was too late to turn back now anyway, he was set in his way. Deku knew that he always had the weakness that he overthought things. That was already the case when he was still a sad, quirkless, hero-worshipping little boy named Izuku Midoriya. But that was back before his illusions had been shattered and the entire hero society itself was crushed. He remembered his annoying habit to always start mumbling absent-mindedly in public about one topic or the other. Mostly about heroes or the characteristics of different quirks. This had caused him to get embarrassed more than once. Well, these times were long over. One of the first things that All for One had taught him was having more self-control. Control that he now applied all the time. Even the people that were around him every day, especially with them. Trust was something rare. That was another thing All for One had taught him, and something never to be given without reassurance. He would continue his plans, no matter what. First, however, he had another matter to take care of, one more personal. Deku walked to another part of the headquarters. He stepped through the corridors until he entered a large outer yard inside of the building. There he was being awaited by the members of his personal elite team. Or maybe he should say his old school friends. Ochako was already waiting for him right at the entrance. The rest of their team was waiting at the other side of the place. It was Deku's personal fighter unit that consisted mostly of some of his and Ochako's former classmates. Besides them there were Fumikage Tokiyami, a boy with a head resembling that of a raven and a dark gloomy attitude. Shoto Todoroki, a son of the long-dead so-called Hero Endeavor. Momo Yaoyorozu, originally a rich girl and somewhat spoiled girl, who had become a weapon expert able to use her quirk to create even the most dangerous guns and equipment. And Hitoshi Shinso, called the Brainwasher. In his childhood people had often said he would become a villain, just because of his quirk. In the end he became something worse. These were the people Deku trusted most in this world. Not that this meant all too much, since he had made it his habit long ago to trust nobody completely. In the end not even they, and under them not even Ochako, who he "trusted" most, had any idea about the true extent or nature of his plans. Himiko Toga had been part of this team too, before she had switched sides a couple years back. Standing next to them was also their new "recruit, Minoru Mineta." The small turncoat was looking visibly uncomfortable beside his former classmates turned elite killers. At the same time, however, he seemed to have a hard time keeping his eyes and his hands from Momo, who was standing next to him. It was actually Deku himself who told her to stay close to him and make promises to Mineta. Verbal and silent ones. If she had any intentions to actually keep these promises was another matter. He nearly felt sorry for the little worm when he imagined what Momo might do to even this little worm in the moment he was no longer useful to them. Thoughts crossed his mind about piercement or castration and being force-fed the body parts in question. Well, it was not really his concern what Momo did anyway. What concerned him was only the information that Mineta possessed and his ability to infiltrate the resistance for them. Had the midget actually been useful in either personal skills or quirk, Deku might have considered keeping him around for good, but like this. As far as he was concerned, Mineta Minoru was a waste of life and Momo would do the world a favor by removing him from it. And then the last member of their team, Tsuyu Asui, who was currently being shackled and bound to a metallic chair at the end of the yard, surrounded by the rest of the team. She was all but a waste of life, despite her quirk not looking all that impressive at first glance. Yet she was the perfect example that intelligence, determination and imagination in using one's abilities could more than make up for such perceived weaknesses. But sadly, Tsuyu, he addressed her, Deku, she said. You know why you are here? He asked her rhetorically. I don't know. Is this maybe a new lewd game you came up with, Ribbit? Is this why Ochako is here? Will Shoto, Fumikage and Momo join us too this time? And Mineta too? Or are they just here to watch? But doing it in public like this is really not usual for you. Deku was just looking at her wordlessly, betraying nothing to the outside. If he was embarrassed by her comments, he didn't show it. You know I like your attitude and that loose mouth of yours, he stated. It makes you interesting. But this is really not the time for it, he told her. Mineta here has informed me that the resistance has a source, an inside man, inside my closest circle, he said with a side glance to the nervous-looking boy. And there are only a few people even coming in question for this. And you think it is me? She stated. I know it is Yusuyu, he replied. After Mineta gave me this information, I had Hagakuri and our other spies closely observe everyone close to me. And guess who was the one they found making suspicious communications? Especially shortly after I intentionally leaked shreds of supposedly important information to you all, he said pointedly. I guess there is no point in denying it, right? Suyu responded with a small and sober smile. No, he replied. First Himiko, now you. Su, why did you betray me? He asked her in a fake tenderly voice. She was looking upwards to him with her typical blank expression for a short moment before she responded. Izuku. What makes you believe I was ever on your side in the first place, Ribbit? At her answer, Dekiru reacted a bit unexpectedly, with a smile on his own forming on his face. Ah, right. You truly cannot tell who is truly on whose side these days, he laughed. Am I right, Mineta-kun? He asked with another pointed side glance to the now ashamed-looking traitor to the resistance. Then he turned back to Suyu. I guess you never truly believed in our cause then? And that despite that we have spared your family during the purges. Our cause? All we are doing is killing countless innocent people in some insane attempt to change the world. And you act as if the fact that you had not downright slaughtered my family was doing me a personal favor. Are you actually listening to yourself, Ribbit? Whatever, he replied. He bowed down close to her face. I want to tell you that I really enjoyed our time together, he said to her. Then he placed a short key asterisk on her wide lips. Ochako, do you want to do it? He asked her. Okay, she said. But do it quickly, he said. We are all friends after all. She smiled at him wickedly and pulled out a knife from her pocket. Of course, she said. I will not torture a friend, even if she has betrayed us. I will miss you, Sue, she told her. You know, I would really like to tell you that I am sorry about this, but then would be a lie. You have made your choice and this are the consequences. Suyu said nothing in response. They both knew there would be no point in it. Ochako lifted the knife, held it to Suyu's throat, and made a clean cut from one side to the other. It took a few more moments. Blood was running out of her wound and flowing everywhere, over her body, the chair and the ground. Then it was over. They all were looking at the lifeless corpse of their teammate wordlessly. One who was staring especially intense was Todoroki. I am sorry, Suyu, he thought silently. You have sacrificed yourself for me. It should not have been necessary. If only they had been more careful. If only he had been more careful. And if Mineta had not sold them out. He cringed inside, but was trying not to let it show to anyone. What they didn't suspect was that Suyu had not been the only one in Dekiru's inner circle to turn on them. A few days later, the group consisting of heroes and 2 villains from another world and a few of rebels from this one was getting ready. They would start their trip to America today, or at least right at its border. At first Kurogiri would teleport them to a small uninhabited island at the west coast. The members of the rebellion that were actually coming with them were Kurogiri, Himiko, 2 fighters they had never met before, and a bit surprisingly Mei Hatsume. If they were honest, they were not quite sure what the exact purpose of having the inventor with them on their journey was. Kurogiri made sense, since he was the one who teleported them in the first place and could eventually get them out of a dangerous situation. And Himiko for her combat experience and ability to copy the powers of others. Hatsume's skill, however, was supposed to be creating and maintaining equipment and weapons. And while this was certainly an important job, especially in a resistance movement, their trip was not meant to be that long that the equipment they were carrying with them would need any maintaining. It was clear to them that she would be far more useful and in less danger back in the hideout. But this world's stain in Aizawa's double for some reason insisted on her coming with them, so they agreed to take her along. There their combined group would spend the next couple of days training together and learning to operate as an actual team, and then they would make the next jump to the eastern coast. Right into the center of terror. The island itself should be relatively safe, according to the resistance members, as the powers of the Nameless Ones were concentrated nearly entire on the mainland and their zombies had never been seen crossing the sea. At least not till now. Izuku and the others had to admit they were afraid. Actually, they were terrified. They all had been taught and trained to face villains and criminals, even the most dangerous ones. But this was far beyond villains and criminals or even organizations like the League. This were cosmic menaces or horrors beyond anything they could have even imagined. And in today's they would step on an entire continent filled with this horrors. The plain truth was, they were afraid. And the students were not the only ones. Even Endeavor and Aizawa shared the same fear. The only ones who did not really showed any signs of it so far were the people from this reality. But only because they had been living with this terror for years now. Because they had learned to do it. Because they simply had to. And so it came in a quite ironic way, that two different groups, one consisting of 2 experienced heroes and 3 rebel fighters, one of them an ex-villain, and the other one of students and kids, were sitting at the 2 fires they had made close to the tents they had built up and were holding nearly the same conversation. Both groups sitting just around a dozen meters from each other. So how do you do it, living like that? Endeavor asked. You learn it, Kurogiri said. You simply have no choice. At first you spend every single days just hoping to survive to the next. Then you hope that even if you die, at least the people next to you will survive, one of the resistance fighters, a woman named Korra, said. As all for one's assistant, I admit I was a somewhat privileged position at the beginning, Kurogiri stated. Until I could no longer see what was happening without doing anything against it. So I had the luck to avoid most of the true horror at the beginning. I only joined the resistance as it was already a seasoned organization, he admitted. But I have still seen more than enough, even in my time under All for One. So how do you do it, to live like that? Momo asked. You just do it, Hatsume responded. Both she and Himiko continued to give quite similar answers like Kurogiri. Over the time, she stated, you just try to make the best out of the time you have. So you have given up hope? Izuku asked them. What hope do you think is here? Dabi cut in. Everyone here is just too tactful to mention it, so I will say it. This world is doomed. For a moment nobody was saying anything. Hatsume and Himiko exchanged a silent look, and so did Izuku and the others. Damn it, Dabi. You truly know how to make the mood worse, Toga said a second later with a somewhat forced smile. But he is not wrong, her double Himiko pointed out. You know, as heroes, we should probably see it as our duty to try to save this world, Aizawa pointed out. But I don't even know what we could do here at all. To be completely honest, deep down I want nothing more than return to our world and forget that I have ever seen this reality. Endeavor stared at him for a split second. I cannot disagree, he admitted. Even if I would not have said it loud in front of an ex-villain or a couple of strangers. You are not wrong, the woman named Korra admitted. Objectively seen we have no chance at all. That has become clear long ago. The best we could always hope for was to save some people, Hatsume admitted. But even that often just for a short time. Because they would only be in danger again later, Himiko added. I once saved a small group of people meant to be purged from the execution squads shortly after I defected. Half of them were children. I was using my quirk the entire time. So they had never even seen my true face. Later I led them to a hideout where they would be safe for the moment. At least I thought so. 2 days later I returned with help. And we found them all being slaughtered. This was not your fault, Tsuyu said. They had just found them coincidentally, right? Todoroki stated. You could not have known that. I know, Himiko replied. But, she now visibly cringed. Is there something else? Tsuyu asked. I don't think she wants to talk about this, Momo pointed out. There was this small boy. He always called me Big Sis, Himiko continued. He even let me drink his blood. His mother was not happy about it in the beginning. But since I had saved all their lives, she allowed it, And as I saw their dead bodies. Were you angry that you could not save them, Ribbit? Tsuyu asked. Were you blaming yourself? Did you want revenge on the ones who did it? I was getting thirsty. Okay. Himiko suddenly shouted angrily. When I saw their bloody corpses and their blood everywhere around them, I could just not stop my appetite. I wanted nothing more than kneeling down and drink it, she said. And I was ashamed of myself. The people I rescued and befriended had been murdered and I could think of nothing else but. Himiko looked into their shocked faces. They all realized that tears were flowing out of her eyes. Even her counterpart Toga had the sense to look downwards somewhat ashamed. I am sorry, Suyu said. You know I always just say what is on my mind. Even if sometimes I should keep my mouth shut. I know, Himiko replied. You and I used to be close friends once. This statement caused a small smile to return to Toga's face. God damn it. Bakugo suddenly broke out. Since we are already competing who is the greatest asshole, you all know I have spent my entire life being an arrogant little shithead who thought he was better than everyone around me because I could blow up shit, he hissed. That I would become a hero and be the greatest, because heroes always win. What a joke. Being a hero is not just about winning Kachan, Izuku stated. I know. It is about doing the right thing and what you have to sow, no matter the odds. I know that now, he replied. Great words. Dabi commented sarcastically, if the heroes would only actually follow them. Some of us do, Izuku argued. Yeah, sure. After their last outbursts, they noticed that from the other fire endeavor was looking over at them. More precisely, he was looking at Shoto, and even more at Dabi. By the way, Izuku asked, is there anything going on between you and Endeavor? You could say that, Dabi replied. On the coast island the heroes, rebels and villains continued their combined training. Tomorrow they would make the final move to the mainland and start their quest to find the original gateway. The thing that started all this. They all felt the same fear inside themselves, about what they were going to face. What they had seen firsthand in Japan had already been bad enough. Like killed people hanging on pikes and crosses and a completely psychotic version of Uraraka. But what was coming now? They had heard the stories and more importantly, they all had watched the film footage. Scenes just like directly out of the worst horror movies. Some of the greatest pro-heroes getting killed like they were nothing and even All Might dying right on screen. Monsters reducing major cities to ruins. They all admitted they were afraid, but that fear didn't really change anything after all. They would have to face it anyway. They would have to or retreat, and retreat was no option to them. Not if they did not want to be trapped here in this hellish world for the rest of their lives. So tomorrow, Izuku murmured. Tomorrow they would see the same nightmare they had so far only watched on recording. Yeah, tomorrow. Bakugo repeated more grimly. We will make it somehow, Ribbit. I mean we have Aizawa-sensei and Endeavor with us and... Suyu tried to say something encouraging. I just wished Endeavor were truly something you could count on, Dabi, who was standing in a close distance to them, remarked coldly. So says the pro-villain, Shoto Todoroki commented. Better than a false hero, Dabi retorted. Take a look at either of us, little brother, and tell me again that you actually think Endeavor is someone who can be trusted with someone else. Saveti, Dabi replied. Be brother? Suyu asked shocked. Shoto what? Momo asked him confused. It is true, Todoroki admitted. They started to explain the situation to them. How Dabi was in fact Todoroki's eldest brother Toya, who had been thought dead for years, but had in fact survived the incident back then. What was also the reason for Dabi's scarred body? Well, damn it, Bakugo remarked. Does Endeavor know? Izuku asked. Yes, he does, Dabi stated. I confronted him about it not long ago. His reaction was like you probably expect. Yes, Shoto just said. Really, you all should be seeing your faces, Toga said with a grin. You all look so surprised, she laughed. Except you of course. She pointed at Shoto. But you already knew, right? I have to admit, they really do, even her more peaceful counterpart Himiko agreed. But you are not helping with your behavior. I know, she replied. But if Izuku gives me a hug, I might be willing to stop, she said with an even wider grin. Ah. Izuku was looking a bit awkward. Or you could just leave it, Suyu suggested. Oh. Can it be you want one too? Toga asked. Don't worry, I am sure Izuku will give you one too if you ask. Or better yet, he could give me some of his blood. Izuku was now looking even more strange, and he visibly blushed. He was not the only one, so was Suyu, and even of all people Himiko. But she was also feeling uneasy. This reminded her all too much of the relationship she once had with Dekiru. Only if she were honest, as twisted this Toga's affection to Izuku was, it actually seemed healthy in comparison to her own past relationship. A memory flashed through her mind of herself and Dekiru standing side by side in an abandoned football stadium, with the playing field before them entirely filled with dead bodies. He was holding her in his arms after she had drunk the blood of some of the corpses, and their versions of Ochako and Tsuyu standing right next to them. Monster, she thought about herself. That might actually not be a bad idea, Todoroki suggested to everyone's surprise. What? Izuku said, surprised. Given Toga's abilities and that she can now even copy quirks, this could be a real help. So we all should give both Togas a bit of our blood. Does that include me? Bakugo said, more than a bit irritated. The thought of actually giving the two "vampire girls" his blood willingly didn't sit well with him. By far not. But even he saw that it could improve their chances. Oh, I think I actually start to like working with you, Toga however giggled. If you all give us a bit, we should be able to switch between your appearance and your quirks at will, Himiko pointed out. Do you think that is a good idea? Momo asked. I mean, she seems quite reliable, she pointed at Himiko. But our Toga. You know what we will be facing tomorrow, Shoto said. He looked around at all of them. They all remembered the video that showed the last fight of this world's All Might. Yes. They realized they needed to use any chance they could take. Then Shoto turned his gaze back to Dabi. You know, father has been better for some time now. It seems the things what happened lately had finally taught him a few things. I am not even sure if I even want to give him a chance sometimes, he admitted. But he is trying. Too late, Dabi said coldly like ice. Far too late. I knew that you would react like that, Shoto answered. I expected you to say that, Shoto replied. Just at that moment said Endeavor and Aizawa joined them. They had both been until just now been in a conversation with Kurogiri. But neither of them seemed to have heard the last part of the teenagers' discussion. Or if they did, they didn't let it show. We have just talked about what will happen tomorrow, Aizawa stated matter-of-factly. We should all go to bed now. It will be a very hard day. That might be the understatement of the century, they all knew. What have you been talking about? Endeavor asked, seeing the faces of everyone. I have told them about us, Dabi said. Why? Why not? Dabi responded. Are you afraid of this children here knowing about your past? Not longer looking up to you? Toga and Shoto has also brought up the idea of us giving some of our blood to her and Himiko, Momo mentioned. I see, Aizawa said. Kurogiri had actually suggested this as well. He gave a light shrug with his shoulders. I guess it is a good idea given their abilities in this situation. As much as it goes against my principles to give a villain extra powers. You say it, Endeavor just commented. But given that tomorrow we will face an entire country full of monsters, we simply have no choice. Toga had now an even wider grin on her face. You hear it, Izuku-kun. Even they think you should give me some of your blood. So. Not now, Aizawa said sternly. We should wait with it till tomorrow. So that you can use it the longest possible time. Okay. Toga said with a tone of obvious fake innocence. The next morning they all had been standing up early. Izuku and the others got ready within minutes. Just like it was natural, since they were trained to be heroes. As one of the last things before the final jump to the mainland, they all were giving the two Togas a bit of their blood, as agreed. Even Bakugo did so reluctantly. Then they all assembled around Kurogiri, who used his powers once again to transport them right on an empty beach at the coastline of what had once been California. Not far away from them were the remains of a small coast town. So far all they could make out was by a look from the distance, but that was enough already to give them an impression. Broken and crumbled houses, wrecked or simply abandoned cars standing all over the streets, dust and garbage lying in between. On the first look it was a ghost town. No single human life was left. No human life. But that did not mean that the town was empty. Figures were starting to fill the streets. They all knew instantly that it must be the former inhabitants of the town. But none of them was human, at least not anymore. At first they only saw them as vac figures in the distance. But as the beings stated to come closer, they could make out more details. It was the same sight as they had seen in the video recording earlier. A few of the former human beings had grown extra appendages, like tentacles or sharp claws. But that was not it. While strange appearances were nothing unusual, with mutation quirks being common, this here was something else. No matter how bizarre someone looked at the outside thanks to his quirk, underneath it they were still clearly people. Things however were not. Beside their mutations, they all looked like moving corpses. Their skin was virtually rotting from their bodies. Some of them had open wounds that were however not bleeding. But in opposite to for example Shigaraki, whose quirk was literally decay, he still had the mannerism, charisma and personality that identified him as a living person. These beings however had not. Their expressions seemed frozen and empty. Their movements were crude and broken, somehow uncoordinated, nearly as if something else was moving their bodies. Their long dead eyes were all glowing with the same bizarre sickly yellow light as the crowd of mutated zombies was moving towards them. It was a bizarre, nearly surreal sight. There was something that felt just fundamentally wrong about these beings. Enough to send a cold shudder over their bodies. But since they were all either trained heroes or hardened rebels and villains, none of them let it show. They all kept their demeanor. "Before you ask," the Kurogiri said calmly. "Yes, as far as we know this place is typical for the entire continent." "Not that this makes one feel any better," Himiko commented. The former citizens, creatures had now come even closer to them. "Should we just blow them up?" Bakugo questioned. "Or burn them down," Dabi added sardonically, with a grin on his disfigured face. "They don't really seem that dangerous," Izuku said as well. "We can probably take them." "Spare your strength," Kurogiri stated. "These are just pawns. There is no use in fighting them. It will become far worse when we get closer to our target." "Kurogiri is right," Aizawa stated. "Getting into a fight here is a waste of time. We need to get to the gateway and back home." "I guess we have seen enough," Endeavor said flatly. "Yes. Let's move on," Kurogiri, Himiko said as well. They could now hear the distorted growls and shouts of the zombie horde. But Kurogiri just teleported them away again. This time to the east coast, where their ultimate destination was located. They needed to find the gateway. In that point Aizawa and Endeavor were right, Kurogiri and Himiko both knew. Even if their objective was not exactly the same as the dimensionally marooned heroes and villains. The gateway was the way the Nameless Ones had reached their world in the first place. If they could destroy it, hopefully after they send the others back, they might be able to cut off or at least weaken their influence. Hopefully. That would only leave the threat of the so-called Dark Order as a menace to their world. And even if this idea did not work, sending the others back would at least give them the chance to prevent the same disaster from happening in their timeline as well. Former UA Academy, Japan, at the same time, the creature calling himself Nergal, or the Overlord, as he was also called here, was just entering another part of his private area of the former UA building. Dekiru was currently, along with his special team, on a mission regarding the "visitors" they recently had in this world. And the Overlord was meanwhile taking care of business of his own. The room he was just entering was in the deepest part of this personal sanctuary of him. It was a place where nobody beside him had access to. Not even Dekiru could enter this room without personal permission from him. And there were reasons for that. Because this here was the area where he followed his activities that were not directly related to this world. It was also here where he went when he got into contact with the other greater parts of their organization, that spanned over many realities and worlds. Like right now, he stepped inside a large round empty room. Appearing in the room before him were 5 transparent shadow-like figures. They were however not truly physically there, but just spiritual apparitions. A couple of them were massive armored figures like Thanos and Ensaba Nur, while others were clad in similar black cloaks like Nergal himself. They were the other lords of the Dark Order, the other leaders of their organization beside himself. Every one of them was a cosmic force of darkness in their own right, capable of destroying entire worlds. Even before their official alliance. Together they were even more, a force that would someday change all of reality in their image. Most of them had originally been mortal beings or in some cases more half-gods, who over the centuries of their lives extended their powers to the point where they reached a cosmic level. A fraction of this power was even present in the room, even if their physical selves were not. "You have called for us," one of the cloaked figures, who had just appeared, greeted him. "Is there something you want to inform us about?" "Yes," he replied. Then the apparition of Thanos addressed him. Tell us. Are there any news about our special side project? He asked. Special side project. That meant everything they had been doing on this world. Their ongoing contest with the Nameless Ones, the destruction of the old hero system, the takeover of the ASEAN continent, the re-education, and the ongoing purges of the population. The selection of suitable natives as soldiers for their cause and sending them off to other dimensions. Everything. All that just a side project. There had been a dimensional breach. We have intruders in this dimension, Nergal stated. Enemies? One of the robes figures asked. No, neutrals. By what one of my adjutant's executors reported, it was a group of counterparts of these so-called heroes of this world. Most likely from the timeline that diverged from this one 9 years ago. They have allied with the resistance. I see. Are they a threat to your operations? Thanos asked. Not at all, Nergal responded. I would have just ignored them and let the troops deal with them, but according to our spies, they are trying to get control of the so-called gateway portal that gave the Nameless Ones access to this reality. It seems they plan to send the intruders back into their own world, and that the rebels hope that destroying the gateway will negate or reduce the Nameless Ones' influence on this world. My adjutant has taken his own warrior group and gone to intercept them. Interesting, Thanos replied. But still nothing that should be of any concern for us in the great scale of things, one of the other figures stated. Remind us. How many forces has your domain provided to our cause during the last year? Another one asked. Averagely around 50 persons per month who met our standards, Nergal responded. Only 50? From half a planet. Against all the time invested and the effort it costs us to keep the Nameless Ones in check. It seems this world stays far behind our expectations. Maybe we should reconsider our project. Maybe, another lord stated. Let us decide this another time, Thanos Apparition said. Let us first see how this turns out. We will be in contact again. With this, the presence of the other 5 beings disappeared and Nergal was left behind alone. Yes. They would see. Soon the fate of this reality would be decided for good. Or maybe it already was. North America. At the same time, Deku and his team had just arrived at the west coast, at a different location as the Heroes group. In opposite to them, they did not use a transportation quirk to reach the American continent, but special teleportation devices given to them by their masters. After the loss of Tsuyu, they consisted of Deku himself and this reality's versions of Ochako, Todoroki, Tokiyami, Momo and Shinso. We are here, native Uraraka commented. Yes, Deku said. Am I the only one who thinks that this is suicide? Native Todoroki remarked. Now, Deku replied, don't you think if our soft counterparts can do this, we can as well? They are desperate. We are not, Todoroki just replied. We aren't? Deku replied sarcastically. Have you forgotten that our masters are literally the only thing that keeps our world from being completely overrun? Do you think it is a good idea to stay completely dependent on them to survive? How long do you think their mercy will hold up? You know how high they think about mercy. So if we can get to the gateway and cut the goddamn thing off for good. I get your point, Todoroki said defensively. He was not really trying to convince Deku to stop the mission. That was not his mission. Just to rile him up. Todoroki knew him well enough to know the small doubts he mentioned would only edge him on to continue. And that was what the resistance wanted as well. He was a spy for them after all. This absolute fearlessness in face of his goals was actually one trait Deku still had in common with his alternate hero self. Only that he used it for different purposes. But in the end, they all knew too well that there was no guarantee that destroying the gateway would actually stop the Nameless One's intrusion into their world, now that they were already here. They were not simply an enemy army or civilization. Just like the Dark Order, they were a cosmic force that had invaded their reality. It was not likely that simply shutting down a machine, no matter how advanced, could stop them. Then let us continue, Deku said. I am curious about meeting my other self. He exchanged a short look with Uraraka, who gave him a smile in return. There was however also another possible reason to get their hands on the gateway. To get control of it, instead to destroying it. It was true that maybe one day their masters would fail to hold the Nameless Ones back. Or that they would maybe judge this world unworthy and destroy it themselves. Like they did with many others. In both cases it could mean the end of this planet, maybe even this universe. But with the gateway it would be possible to leave this doomed world for another. The East Coast Izuku and the others had meanwhile reached the outskirts of the place where their final destination laid. They were standing in front of the decaying ruins of what had once been New York City. Here, somewhere in between the endless broken wasteland, was the place of the original gateway. And like with the smaller town they had seen, there were at a few places in the distance the figures of the corrupted and undead former citizens wandering through it. This was also the place where this world's All Might had died. Shit. That was all Bakugo said as he saw the horror landscape. What now? Endeavor questioned. Are we supposed to fight ourselves through the entire town? We should try to move quietly for now, Kurogiri stated. If things come hard to hard, my quirk can help us. You have already used it a few times today, Himiko pointed out. There don't seem to be that many of them on the streets, Aizawa suggested. We might be able to get some distance before we are discovered. By all respect, Sensei, Tsuyu said, you sound awfully optimistic. Do we have another choice? Shoto asked. Yes. Giving up and staying in this world, Dabi remarked. No, Momo said. I don't want to stay here either, Toga stated. They all were exchanging glances with each other. Then let us go, Endeavor said. They were now entering the outskirts of the city. For a short time, it was working. They were moving quickly from building to building and street corner to street corner. But after about 1 to 2 kilometers, their luck ran out. Standing between this building and the next was a large group of around a dozen grotesque deformed zombies. Let's blow them up, Bakugo stated. That will be heard for kilometers, Shoto replied. Burn them instead, Dabi instead. We have 3 people with fire quirks here. And 1 with ice, Endeavor added. We strike at the same time. First we burn them, then you will freeze everything and extinguish the flames. Shoto nodded. All 3 Todorokis took positions. Then they unleashed their powers at the same time and turned the street into a small sea of flames, before Shoto spread ice over the entire place. As expected, nothing was left of their target's decide dust. Not even burned skeletons were to see. These people were already dead. I mean, nothing was left inside of them anymore, right? Momo asked, unsure. Does it makes any difference? Toga asked. Any difference? Izuku asked, unsettled. You have seen what these people became, Himiko pointed out. My counterpart might have not the most sensitive way to say it, but, even if there were something left of their former selves, would you want to live like this? Izuku, Tsuyu, Momo and Shoto were all looking downcast at the spot where they had just burned the group of zombies. Aizawa and Endeavor were also looking with a sober look on their face. Even Dabi was. It was in this moment when they heard the growling coming from everywhere around them. It seemed their gamble had failed. The fire had been noticed by the other creatures anyway. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.